So, Asmongold has been facing a lot of controversy recently, mostly for many reasons. One of which was the Stellar Blade controversy, which I talked about a little bit ago, and he's kind of been a big supporter of the people who are complaining about the outfits being changed, even though it's just a little bit. But he's also been facing controversy lately due to what he has been saying about the pro-Palestine protests that have been going on at college campuses, mostly Columbia and UCLA. There was a video where Piers Morgan had on Hasan Piker, and he was arguing for the pro-Palestine protesters, and it was very viral. You probably have already seen it, and Asmongold basically reacted to it in a way of basically saying that he did not care about Palestine, he did not care about Israel, but he was against the protest because it was blocking traffic, despite the fact that it wasn't. These protests that were happening in the university, in encampments that weren't blocking people from like traveling across the campus. But we'll get to that because that gets brought up in the debate. Obviously, that sparked a lot of outrage. He made a video being like, "Oh, people are trying to cancel me because of this." But like he makes like a cancellation video, like, "Oh, I've been canceled like every month at this point." So it means nothing. It's just him complaining about people being mad at him for having a terrible opinion. And it really escalated when he made a video of the police breaking up the UCLA encampment in a video that was titled "UCLA Protesters Fuck Around and Find Out," where essentially he was cheering on the police beating these protesters.
All right, here we go.
Look at this dozen or so CHP officers now closing in on the front of the encampment, and it looks like somebody's about to give the order to go ahead, move in here. I think we're seconds away from seeing some movement here on the east end, on the east side of this encampment, where there is a large makeshift plywood wall. Under construction.
Oh, the cops are going for it.
We'll see just how well constructed it was, but I think there's plenty of opportunity here for them.
Here it comes.
This wall and make entry into
Waited all fucking night for this.
They're starting to make their
God damn.
Another group of officers
And to think I was gonna go to bed. The moment of truth, yeah.
Royce Hall. Dozens of students now being escorted away from Royce Hall with their hands up. And officers now
No combat. Yep. Just give up. Just give up, boys. Let's go.
Yeah, just
Uh-oh.
Really difficult to see what's happening in here.
They about to scatter? We'll see what happens.
Whatever barricades are in their way.
just an hour and a half of this guy just cheering on these police officers. It's just terrible. He's just cheering on these officers to brutalize these students at this point. And this was like kind of the big straw that ended up with this debate. And we'll get into it, but just like, it's just so maddening out in support of all this that's been going on. But he also doesn't talk about the counter protesters at all. He didn't talk about them at all during this whole thing. Just talking about the officers' response, not, the pro-Israeli counter protesters who attacked these students. Not one bit. Just completely gross, but let's get into it.
Like you're talking about Martin Luther King. He also explicitly was against blocking transportation. And so there were lines even that he had.
Wait, Martin Luther King also participated in the Montgomery bus boycott. It's all good.
But yeah, I didn't want to derail your stream or anything. Or like
No.
But yeah, before this before this whole debate conversation, whatever, they had a Twitter exchange, and I think what they were talking about there will definitely get brought up. This was the same day. It was like they had this exchange on Twitter, and then Hasan brought him on to the stream via Discord.
No, not at all. My stream is a sequence of endless derailments in general, so
Yeah. So right here, there's additional context from the fan channel that posted this. So Zach Asmongold was saying that these protesters were breaking the law because they were stopping people from going to class, even though that's not true. And again, someone we'll get into. And he responded to that. He responded to Hasan saying that that wasn't true by a video of this guy who was trying to get into the encampment, who was an agitator, who claimed that he wasn't able to go to class because of the encampment being in the way. However, that wasn't true. This guy is a Zionist agitator who was trying to make the encampment look bad by staging the whole thing. And really, he is someone who worked with the police. He is a counter-protester who, trying to agitate the pro-Palestine protesters in the encampment. There was this post right here. Yeah, there's also Destiny being a dumbass. Destiny tried to say that Hamas rockets were fueled by sugar and fertilizer, which was true. That's what early Hamas rockets were fueled by. And you know what? We might as well just watch the clip. It has nothing to do with the
Israeli
debate between Asman and Hasan, but we'll just watch this. This is what I wanted to cover. I was gonna watch the full thing, but it was 2 hours long, so we'll just watch this little clip.
The population has always had a calorie surplus.
Yeah, even the diet part.
Calorie surplus.
They literally have. That's why when the famine started, when all the people were moved, I believe it was UNRWA that made the statement that this is a region that has never experienced hunger before.
That's what's so infuriating.
And that's also why Finkelstein got mad, because if you try to say, really, wait, these people are starving? By what metric? You can't find
that's what's so infuriating, Stephen, is that you want to start counting calories and try to discover whether they have a surplus or not, when you're missing the fact that Israel getting to decide what food gets into Gaza is itself outrageous.
Right.
One people does not get to control whether another side gets to have cookies for their children, or potato chips or sodas. You don't get to do that. That's a level of dominance and oppression that is unacceptable.
But you're not capable of having it because you won't even admit why the blockade exists. So you don't even deserve to be in that conversation.
What do you want him to admit? What do you want him to admit?
Why is there a blockade in Gaza?
Yeah, you tell me.
Why is there a blockade in Gaza?
When you look at the fact that Israel is preventing cookies from going into Gaza, you know that it's not motivated by military.
Why were cookies being prevented from going in?
And
what were custom rockets fueled with?
Yeah, with cookies? Yeah.
With sugar and fertilizer. Yes, that's how they made the early rockets, the first generation that was
we're going to deny Palestinians in Gaza sugar because it might be used for...
First of all, you're not allowed back in because they use more sophisticated rockets.
That's also something about that. That's also collective punishment, which you're not supposed to engage in when it comes to something like this. Just because it might get to Hamas doesn't mean you keep it from Palestinians. That is collective punishment. The same thing happened when Israel cut off cut off Gaza's water and electricity. That's collective punishment. You're not supposed to engage in that. That is a war crime.
He's not going to admit it. I just want to be clear another time. Another thing you're not going to admit. Why does the blockade exist? It's literally just because of the evil Jews trying to kill the Amalekites.
Oh yeah, he also tries to, this guy right here, Destiny's opponent, the guy to the far left, he also tries to claim later on in the debate that he is anti-Semitic with no proof, just to show how bad faith and terrible he was. He got his ass handed to him with this entire thing. I did pre-watch it a little bit. That's why I wanted to watch it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have given a shit. But he got his ass handed to him. He just looks like a little troll. He looked like a little troll. And the same thing happened with the debate with Norman Finkelstein on Lex Friedman. He continuously shows his ass when he's actually faced with people who are actually knowledgeable about this subject. But let's just let the clip continue.
Hamas fighters breathe air too. Maybe Israel can restrict air from going into Gaza to make sure that Hamas
But he's saying then the burden should be on Hamas, not to use...
It's not,
no, Palestinians have no agency.
No.
Rape is the language of the oppressed.
You don't,
they can't help themselves,
you don't punish the civilian population to get at military ones. You don't punish civilian populations.
Like indiscriminately shooting tens of thousands of rockets decade after decade into Israel, like what Hamas does?
That's what Israel does. That's literally what Israel has done, sending rockets into Gaza to kill Palestinians for decades. That's literally what they have done to an nth degree.
The scale of Israeli violence,
like selling some of the humanitarian food back to the population.
I just want to make sure.
This doesn't know when to shut up.
Of water pipes and using them to fashion rockets.
Just want to make sure I heard.
All the international aid that comes in and building tunnels and tunnels of cement.
Stephen, did you say that Hamas is turning cookies into missiles?
My understanding is the reason for the restricting of sugar-based products was that the first generation, I think they were called Qassam rockets, were built in really crude shops using combinations of fertilizer and sugars that they would use.
Do you know what the primary component of Hamas explosives is now?
I'm pretty sure now they use more sophisticated stuff, but I don't know. You tell me.
Unexploded Israeli bombs, because they've dropped so many over the last.
I don't think that's true.
That's literally what it is. And immediately he's just like, I don't think that's what it is. That is what it is. Most of their rockets now come from unexploded Israeli bombs because of how many they sent. Some of them just didn't go off, so Hamas just collected them, and it was just like, well, we'll use them. Just so fucking dumb. His points are so fucking dumb. He only knows like the few counterpoints that he can use. And when someone comes with anything else that diminishes his point, he's just like, I don't think that's right, with no proof. It's just showing his ass continuously. But let's get back to the thing that I actually wanted to talk about. But yeah, this guy. This is the guy I was talking about. Zionist student who has been terrorizing us, carrying around mace. Yeah, he was carrying mace right here. And he's working with other protesters, I believe. There was another image that showed that he was actually working with police. This guy. So let's get back to the actual debate itself.
Mine, like you're talking about, or even.
Well, he's been there every single day. No, not at all. My stream is a sequence of endless derailments in general, so.
We might. I'll put subtitles on.
Yeah, I mean.
And we might actually increase the speed. I'll probably just do 1.5.
Like, so I see what you're saying, kind of with like the guy entering the encampment, but I think that it's kind of problematic if people just get into a university and build like an area and tell people they can't go inside that area. And also, like in the video, it's hard for me to know whether they're really stopping them from the encampment. Because like, I mean, and you know, you can look at it from my perspective, because you look at that video and it doesn't seem like.
Let's actually watch the video. Here we go.
Entrance. We are UCLA students. I have my ID right here. I'm being blocked off, not by the security guard, but by you two. You three. Oh, look, they're making their burger while I'm going this way. Excuse me. This is what they do. Everybody, look at this. Look at this.
By the way, there are people walking behind him, people who aren't part of the encampment. And he's trying to say they're blocking me. No, they're not. They know who you are. They know you're just doing this to be bad faith, to agitate the encampment. That's why they're blocking you.
Hey, tuition, this is our school, and they're not letting me walk in. My class is over there. I want to use that entrance. Well, I can't take it. Will you let me go in? This can be over in a second. Just let me and my friends go in to class.
We're not engaging in that.
Then you can move. Will you move?
We're not engaging in that.
Okay, we're going. We're going. I'm going in. I have my hands up. I'm not hurting them. I'm not hurting them. That's what they do. That's what they do, everybody. You guys have to be there.
It's just pathetic.
Like there's an encampment behind those people.
Yeah, they framed it in a way specifically so that it would invoke that response from people that are unfamiliar.
So you think that like basically they filmed it from a direction where there aren't.
It's not that I think, I know. I was there.
Oh, no, when did you go there?
I went there 3 days ago, I think, and he was there actually even that day as well. He's been there every single day. So he's one of these broccoli-haired Zoomers that runs around and is like trying to use American foreign policy and active conflict to basically make TikTok clout for himself. He's also worked with groups like Stand With Us, which is a group that directly gets funding from the Israeli government. So like he has worked with the Israeli government to do propaganda already, but I'm sure this is a great career opportunity for him. That's why he's been on Fox News. There's videos of him like trying to debate and agitate teachers that are near the encampment. Even Sky News called him a counter-protester and an agitator. Like he's like a known figure. This is not a random guy. That's also the reason why he is, at least for UCLA campus, he's the only video of like anyone even claiming the students are blocking people from going to campus. Because he's deliberately going up to the encampment in an effort to try to get into the encampment to start fights. When I was there, a bunch of Zionist counter-protesters tried to do that as well. And the students were incredibly well organized, and they just set up a human chain to, like, they don't even like physically apprehend or remove people. They basically just body block them as though they're having a picnic.
Oh yeah, no, I saw that. And I think it was like, 2 nights ago, not last night whenever all this stuff got removed, but the night before. I mean, it was pretty obvious that like the Israeli or like Zionist or anti-Palestinian ones were the aggressors. And I think that that's a bad thing. I mean, I don't think that the guy is in the wrong though for being a counter-protester or even for being an agitator. Really, it depends on how you define the word, because I mean.
What? That's so fucking dumb. He's not wrong for being a counter-protester and an agitator. No, he is. For what? No, he's literally getting paid by the. He literally works with people who have been paid by the Israeli government to create propaganda. He's going to do anything and everything it takes to make this protest look bad. Of course, it's just so fucking dumb.
And that's his freedom of speech, and I feel like that's what's fair, in the same way that it's fair for those other people to go and protest for Palestine.
Yeah, but the difference is, first of all, bear mace, or mace in general, is illegal to bring to protest, and he's like flashing it. There's another video of the students, literally, he walks up to them when they're gearing up for the cops to show up.
Yeah.
And the students say, we are peaceful, we're peacefully protesting against the Israeli genocide here. Like, we see your bear mace, like, please, you're making us feel unsafe. And he actually literally does not have a right to have that on him. And yet, that on that very same night, last night, he was over there dabbing it up with the cops and shit. The cops obviously don't give a shit about the pro-Palestinian encampment, especially because 2 nights prior, at this point, when the counter-protesters actually tried to enter the encampment, they came with weapons, they came with fireworks, they came with skunk spray, they came with bear mace.
That was like the day that, because they were chanting the "Where were you?" Was this the "Where were you" moment?
I don't know what do you mean, where were you? moment?
Yeah, I guess you were sleeping. Like last night, whenever it happened, like a lot of the protesters were like chanting at the cops.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They were saying, like, "Where were you?" Yeah, okay. So like we're talking about the same thing, right?
So the night prior, the reason why they were chanting "Where were you?" last night to the cops is probably because the night prior, Zionist counter-protesters actually stormed the camp and beat the shit out of some of the Palestinian students, or pro-Palestinian students, with like wood pallets.
I watched it happen. I watched it happen live. It was disgusting. Like I was kind of disappointed that the police didn't arrest any of them.
Yeah, the police came. The police actually came.
They did.
Yeah, and they stood by for an hour and 30 minutes in single file line formation while these guys were beating the out of, and these guys aren't even students. Like you can see it in the video. They're like, these guys are like adults. They're older. You know what I mean? They're like older than students.
There's also the protesters that are Palestinians that were identified as being older as well.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's hard
I
to
know. I'm saying.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying that like a lot of these guys.
Yeah, but a lot of them are students, and they have more reason to be there than counter-protesters who are just agitators there to break up any pro-Palestine protest. Because they're disgusting Zionists who just want to support a genocide.
Especially the more violent ones have already been like identified as not going to UCLA, and they're basically return customers. And they're basically return customers at this point. It was a big point of contention with the students too, because UCLA was like, "Oh, we are going to take administrative action against the counter protesters for being violent," and the students were frustrated with that because they were like, "How are you going to do anything as an administration to someone who's not a student?" Because a lot of the counter protesters were not students. Like there were known right-wing figures and stuff like that amongst the counter protesters. Anyway, so the reason why the students were frustrated, understandably, is because they've demonstrated great messaging discipline so far. They are very, they're as limited in their disruption as possible. And historically speaking, campus-wide protests such as this one is infinitely more disruptive than what the pro-Palestinian encampment looked like. I mean, we're talking in 1968, they were taking, literally, students would go in during the civil rights movement with guns and take deans hostage. In 1968 in Colombia, they took
which actually happened with Samuel L. Jackson. It wasn't for the Vietnam protest, though. I think, I actually don't, let's actually look it up. I was going to talk about it during my segment regarding the college campus protests, but we might as well talk about it now. It turns out that Samuel L. Jackson is just as badass as all the characters he plays. In 1969, actor Samuel L. Jackson was expelled from historically black Morehouse College for locking board members in a building for 2 days in a protest of the school's curriculum and governance. This included in this group who were held hostage was Martin Luther King Jr.'s very own father, Martin Luther King Sr. I believe this was actually this was after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Yeah, this was after. Also, when he was expelled, it came after they promised that he would be that he would have amnesty. Like, nothing bad will happen to you if you just give it up. But he was expelled afterwards because amnesty, they promised it, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't just literally just turn around and do it, like just not keep their promise. In 1966, during the height of the civil rights movement, Jackson enrolled at the historically black Morehouse College in Atlanta, the alma mater for Martin Luther King Jr. In 1968, when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, King's body was brought to Atlanta to lie in state at Spelman College, the historically black women's school adjacent to Morehouse. Jackson attended King's funeral as one of the ushers and then flew to Memphis to join an equal rights protest march that changed the way he thought. I was angry about the assassination, but I wasn't shocked by it. I knew that change was going to take something different, not sit-ins, not peaceful coexistence. He stated in an interview with Parade about his reactions to King's death. In 1969, as mentioned before, he and a group of active Morehouse students held the college's board of trustees hostage, demanding that changes be made in the curriculum of the school and stating that they wanted more blacks on the governing board of the institution. Morehouse eventually gave in and agreed to change, but Jackson was expelled for his actions. The summer, he became connected with people in the Black Power movement, including Stokely Carmichael, H. Reb Brown, and others.
Dean hostage for like days.
Yeah, I know about that.
Yeah, they would literally just like shut off access for a dean from like leaving their room. They'd be like, no, you're not leaving. So historically speaking, people on the right side of history that we understand were on the right side of history have taken way more radical and way more disruptive approaches to protest. So all things considered, both in the Columbia University, where they overtook Hamilton Hall again, just like they had done time and time again at Columbia specifically. That hall has a
what they're doing now, the pro-Palestine protesters, what they're doing now is nothing compared to what they've done like during the Vietnam War, where they were a lot more disruptive, a lot more radical. It's not even close. Like, there's nobody taken hostage. The most they did was take over Hamilton Hall, but that was it. And they're being faced with this much brutality from counter-protesters and police. It's just completely insane.
Significance for student protesters. And also, especially at UCLA, where the encampment was like not even remotely disruptive, simply just taking on this massive lawn space where there's a lot of demonstrations usually, and building putting tents around it and trying to protect the tents from people coming in and it up. There are videos of counter protesters breaking into the encampment in spite of the human wall, the human shield, the human chain that they create. And as soon as they get in, they start throwing hooks, throwing bows, stealing people's tents, trying to break the tents apart and stuff. So that's the reason why they don't want to let in random people to protect the students, because they know the university won't do that. As demonstrated by the fact that they didn't do that when the counter protesters came and the cops literally stood idly by.
I do think that like whenever I watched it live, there was like crazy violence. And then once the cops showed up, even whenever they were in that line, the violence went down by like 95%. But I think that you're totally right that the counter protesters were like the agitators. They 100% were, and they were being violent. And to me, it was disappointing that I think the police didn't arrest them.
It's pretty funny that with this YouTube channel, and people will make the argument, well, oh, it's his editor. He can still control what gets put on his channel or not. There's no video about the counter protesters. There's none. But I guess that wasn't, worth putting on his channel.
Because it was pretty obvious that the pro-Palestinian ones were the ones that were the victims in that situation.
Yeah, but they ended up arresting only the pro-Palestinian side. And the night prior, they didn't actually engage with the counter protesters until they were setting off fireworks and launching them directly in the encampment. So the question is, why are they picking a side? Because they've arrested hundreds of students, both at Columbia University, both in CCNY. What's up?
You mean why are the police picking a side?
Oh, the police are picking a side, and it's not the side that is the violent side in this situation. It's the side that's peacefully demonstrating. In my opinion, a direct violation of First Amendment rights. I don't even personally believe that protesters are supposed to, protests are going to be disruptive. Some of those protest movements you might not agree with, or the taxes you might not agree with. But ultimately, the way I look at it is they were the perfect victims in this situation, even though I don't expect them to be perfect victims. And yet, even after all of that, they were still met with violent.
Like, they're protesters who literally did nothing except get attacked and got arrested for it. That's it. Like, Columbia, despite the fact that I'm very much on the protester side, they broke into Hamilton Hall, took it over. You're gonna expect some response to that. Do I approve of the response? No. I'm very much on Hasan's side of being like, protests are meant to be disruptive. That's how it should be. But at least with that, it's okay, they overtook a building, they broke into it. Still, that's the least they did. That's the most they did, and the fact that they had that sort of response from police was absolutely disgusting.
Violent free speech suppression from the state.
I don't know if it's really free speech suppression, right? Because they're not really getting arrested for protesting. They're getting arrested for putting a bunch of tents on the campus whenever the campus tells them to leave.
But it's public property. They have the right to put up those tents. That is free speech suppression.
Yeah, I mean, nobody ever gets arrested for protesting. That's just that's not a thing. Everybody always when states like in Russia or in China or whatever, when people are getting arrested for protesting, the state of course makes up another reason for it there as well. They'll be like, oh, trespassing. You know what I mean? Obstructing.
Would you think that's unreasonable?
Do I think that arresting someone for protesting peacefully is unreasonable? Yes.
Well, do I think that? I mean, I think the better question is that if you own a property, should you have the autonomy to decide who's on that property?
Well, in this circumstance, it's literally public property because it's UCLA. UCLA is a public school too, so that ultimately that ultimately changes the dynamic a lot. It depends on what the property.
If it was a private college, then yeah, that would be trespassing. They could get arrested for that, and that's reasonable. Still don't support it in this case because it would be against pro-Palestinian protesters, but that is illegal. That would, lead to a police response, but it's public property. It's a public school. Continue this.
Property is though. There's like private property, like someone's house, right? I don't think that people should come to your house and protest it at your house. Like it's very different, like disrupting your life, and violating your privacy and safety, versus protesting in the middle of a public space at the school that you pay tuition to is perfectly valid in my opinion.
Well, everybody else pays tuition too. I think it's kind of unfair. For example, some people that pay tuition are locking other people out that are also paying tuition from the same services that they're both paying for.
So you bring up a good point, right? Like you're saying this person also pays tuition. He should be able to go to any space he wants to, any place he wants to on campus, which is correct.
I mean, like I'm sure there's a few exceptions, but yeah, generally.
Yeah. So obviously there are many exceptions, not just a few. Like, UCLA campus is very famous. They shut off certain parts of the campus for filming and stuff like that all the time. The difference here is that this is a broad, open public space that these students were already occupying. And the reason why they're not they weren't disrupting class. They weren't stopping people from going to class. The university, as a matter of fact, is the reason why the other buildings that were in the surrounding area were shut down. I talked to the students when I was there, and they stated they wanted to go to the library, for example. It's across the green area is across the way from the library. They shut down the library during midterms so that these guys' lives would be harder, so that they would have a harder time studying. They shut down the Wi-Fi so that students that are on the encampment would not be able to use it. Try to make this protest as hard for them as possible, which is normal. I don't think that that's a good thing to do personally. I think it probably goes against the values that UCLA espouses, specifically. Ironic because like a lot of these campuses literally have like.
Yeah, and this doesn't have to do with UCLA, but with Columbia, they literally have an entire course surrounding genocide, and the fact that they have been this aggressive towards the protesters is absolutely disgusting. Because it's like, despite the long values and traditions that Columbia has carried about it talking about genocide. When students who have taken those courses, who have taken those classes, who have learned about this, look at something and say, that's obviously a genocide. It shares similar patterns. It's very clear that Israel is trying to commit a genocide against Palestine, against Gazans. They act on that by protesting, by creating an encampment on campus. They do this. They treat them very hostilely. They try to cut off their resources. Just completely disgusting.
Super woke terminology in their studies. Like USC literally doesn't have genocide studies. They call it resistance to genocide studies. So for me, it's like if you're taking that extra initiative to be extra woke on the aesthetic front, you should probably not be surprised when your students learn the actual lessons that you're teaching in these classes, which is that you should resist the genocide, right? So the fact that the university turns around after teaching them about many different genocides that have happened all around the world, and then tries to do everything in their power to make it as annoying for these students as possible is a little hypocritical in my opinion.
It is hypocritical, but it's also something that's driven by the protesters' actions. And the protesters are doing that, and the result of them doing that is the university shutting down those places. And also the university, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this because I'm not really sure exactly. This is just what I've heard. I thought that about 2 days ago, the UCLA said that the protest was unlawful, but before then they were basically kind of not addressing it or not calling in the police to do anything.
Well, here's the thing. By also shutting down the library, they're also shutting it down from other students. So again, this is a form of collective punishment for just students of UCLA who aren't connected to all this. So does that make just because they're doing it in resistance to the protesters doesn't make it right, because you're cutting off that access to other students and making their lives harder just because of a few protests, just because of the protesters that are there.
Is that right?
No, they actually did call the police, but they called the campus police specifically to protect the encampment. I was actually kind of surprised at the university's actions at that time, because they knew that there were a lot of counter protesters that, in comparison to Columbia, for example, which had literally called the police against the encampment in Columbia University.
Yeah, I saw that.
The UCLA campus actually had sent police to line up around with their backs to the encampment. And that's not just symbolism; that actually means something, right? When you send cops, white cops.
If the university is allowing it, then really that's the end result. I mean, they're the ones that make that decision. It seems confusing to me that, based off of the logic that they're trying to shut down the library or the Wi-Fi, but they're also having police come in and protect them. It seems very confusing. Like, what are their goals here? What are they trying to do?
Well, ultimately, their goal is to get the students to shut up and go away and stop bothering the administration to make these moves about divestment. I don't know if you're familiar with the goals of the student protests were, and every campus is different, but like specifically the UCLA one I can speak to.
Is to divest, yeah.
Yeah, is to divest from UCLA. The UC system across the board is a massive endowment, and that endowment basically works like a mutual fund, and they're investing in a lot of corporations, and the students want to have financial transparency in what corporations the university endowments are going to, like what corporations they're investing in, which is perfectly valid, perfectly reasonable demands to make. As a matter of fact, a lot of companies have done this. A lot of people have done this successfully, demanding that people divest from oil and gas companies for like environmental activism. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, it's been going on a lot. And just for the record, like I totally support them protesting against that. Even if I agree or disagree with it, it's their right to protest against that. The only concern that I have is whenever it shuts down other students' ability to learn or get an education, or for people to use the facilities in the way that they're intended to. Yeah. Whenever you talk about the actual like intent of the protesters, I totally support them. Absolutely. Or even the counter protesters, because that's freedom of speech. I think that, if you don't have that, I mean, you don't have anything.
Yeah, as long as they're not trying to like directly agitate, disrupt, and like harm the students, because there's also a completely separate dynamic here. You hate doxing, right? Like I assume, of course.
We all do.
So would it shock you if I were to tell you that there are active organizations that collaborate sometimes with the Israeli government, sometimes independently, that are tasked with doxing students?
I believe they were the ones that were like doxing Harvard students who were pro-Palestine. Like, yeah, it's been ever since this has been going on. Ever since people have been, especially college students, have been very outspoken about being against what's going on in Gaza. There have been groups like Canary Mission who have been leading doxing operations since then, just completely doxing these. There were also there's also been videos of police unmasking these protesters that would end up leading to them getting doxed, to like reveal their identities, like doxing these people, despite the fact that they don't even do that with like white supremacists. That one group of people, that one group of like Nazis, like I think I'm not sure if they were Proud Boys or not. Like they got arrested. They didn't even unmask them. They don't, probably because they don't want to, unmask their friends. They don't want to reveal their friends' identities. But yeah, just completely disgusting.
Students deliberately, and even putting their faces on trucks around the campus, and driving those trucks around the campus with their massive billboards, basically saying like this student, their name, and be like, this is an anti-Semite.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would instantly believe that. I mean, absolutely, and I'm sure that there are people on the other side to do the same thing. It's just
there aren't any official organizations in the same way that Canary Mission, in the same way that like the organization I'm referencing is called Canary Mission. There's a couple other official organizations as well. Some of them are American organizations. They literally directly will be like, oh, are you at a pro-Palestinian protest? You're anti-Semite. And then they plaster their faces. They literally try to stop.
Well, you got that like a week ago, right? Or 2 weeks ago?
StopAntisemitism.org. Called me an anti-Semite of the week.
Yeah,
but I mean, what's up?
Well, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And this is kind of the problem that I have. And I think that really, to me, it's pretty obvious that, being against Israel doesn't mean that you hate Jews, right?
Of course. And there are plenty of Jews who are against Israel as well, especially at those protests.
Well, there's even some that are protesting in Israel, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I understand that. And I think that's problematic too. I don't agree with that either. In my opinion, I think it's intimidation. But it's also like a misrepresentation. So, yeah, I think that's bad in the same way that anybody else. I also don't think that people who are pushing back against these people, like the actual protesters that are making encampments and everything like that, I don't think that they're fascist. Like, I have people calling me a fascist, for example, which I think is really kind of overboard. And
I think some of those guys are fascists, for the record. I do.
And I bet some of the people that are against Israel are anti-Semites. Absolutely.
Yeah, but ultimately, no. I don't disagree with you. I think there's there's definitely anti-Semitism in the pro-Palestine movement as well. But the broader,
that's what sucks with being on the pro-Palestine movement, is that there are definitely bad faith actors who are literally just doing this to be anti-Semitic because they are anti-Semites, like Candace Owens. Candace Owens, while being she's not even pro-Palestinian. She's anti-Israeli. That's it. She's basically doing this because she is anti-Semitic. That's what her ultimate goal is. That's why she talks about the things she talks about, is because she is anti-Semitic. And she's been for a very long time. But yeah, there are also many other people who try to get into these protests, get into these encampments just for the purpose of being anti-Semitic. But mostly, they are they are most usually dealt with. They are kicked off. They are kicked out. They're ostracized. Being, you know, they're the pro-Palestinian protesters handle it very well.
Broadest defense of the movement, right? Like, what does the movement signify? What their overarching goals are? The reason why I have an easier time calling those who defend Israel fascist is because Zionism is predicated on the idea that Israel has to be a Jewish supremacist ethno-state that literally has a certain percentage of Jews inside of Israel. This is a demographic concern unlike any other. Here in the United States of America, if we were to say America has to be a nation that is 75%, Irish, English, and German, white, everyone would understandably go, that's insane. That's just white supremacy. But Zionism is that exact same principle, is that exact same concept, but for very valid historical reasons, it has been able to shelter itself as a defensive posture, as though it is a defensive ethno-state. The valid reasons, of course, being the Holocaust.
In the context of like World War II and like everything that happened. No, I understand that. And I mean, I'm not really a pro-Israel guy, honestly. I don't really give a shit about them. It's not my fight to fight. It's not my problem.
It is actually. Listen,
that's a good point. Yeah, no, I know.
We do spend a shit ton of tax dollars to defend Israel. We gave $26 billion to Israel just this past week.
I mean, yeah, I think it's a waste of money. It's absolutely a waste of money. I wouldn't want to support that, especially not whenever they're doing things and like bombing these people over in Gaza and shit. Like, of course not. Yeah, why would I want to support that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Which is why I think the protest that these students are engaging in is like not only perfectly valid, but I think their methods are above and beyond. Like there are rarely ever going to be protests where like you have a hard time finding a single person that doesn't say something wrong or a single person that doesn't get ahead of themselves.
You're totally right. I mean, you can't color an entire like movement based off of like the most
extreme
extremists or the most bad actors, right? The same as like, I'm sure there are anti-Semites that are Palestinian, pro-Palestinian, but that's not the majority of them.
There are also people who are trying to co-opt. Like, there's always like a bunch of charlatans on Twitter who are actually neo-Nazis, like openly, but then they'll be like, oh yeah, how about them Jews? Like they'll try to like sneak in to be like, oh yeah, we love Palestine, right? When in fact you look a couple tweets down and
they're my friend. Yeah.
So that is actually part of the reason why these student organizers are very careful with who they let into the encampment as well, because they don't want to make sure that they want to make sure that there's no one that is like in support of Palestine or seemingly in support of Palestine that's in there to say like some. And they do a very good job with that too. If someone
that's Nazi shit, that's smart for them to do.
Yeah, so that's the other reason why they don't let everyone into the encampment.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of understand that, but I think that it's also really determined based off of the university. Like, the truth is that the university should have the final say on whether the encampment like that should exist or not. And I think that really, if the university is okay with it, then of course.
The whole point of the encampment is in opposition to the campus, is opposition to the college. Like, say you're in a gunfight with someone. You wouldn't let your opponent choose which gun you used. Why would you do that? That's stupid. They're doing this in opposition to the college. It would be stupid if they only got to make this encampment due to whether the college wanted it or not.
Of course the encampment should exist because they're the ones that determine what the rules are there. But I think if the university doesn't want the encampment, I don't think that the students have the right to make an encampment there. I think that's unfair.
I mean, I think that ultimately, especially like protests will always be disruptive, obviously. But if protests are only determined by how lawful they are, you can write a law to make any protest illegal, which Americans kind of have, as a matter of fact. I don't know if it would shock you to find out if I were to tell you that in your state, in Texas, if you want to work for the Texas state, if you want to work for the city, you have to actually sign a law that says you will never engage in boycotting or demanding divestment or demanding sanctions on the state of Israel. Did you know this? That's a direct violation of First Amendment rights. A direct violation.
How did that even happen?
AIPAC wrote the legislation. This was legislation that actually two Jewish prominent members of Congress were very much against, as a matter of fact. Bernie Sanders and Dianne Feinstein have openly criticized this for obvious First Amendment violation boundaries.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before.
Yeah,
I heard there's like some anti-Semitism today. I haven't read that yet, but I didn't know there was something that was going on that was already on the books, man.
I mean, they're basically trying to make a broader sense of that now with the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. Just making it basically illegal to be critical of Israel at all. Just insane. Just completely fucking insane.
And that's crazy.
Yeah. Would it shock you to find out that there's actually 35 other states, many of them red states as a matter of fact, that claim that they care about First Amendment and no restriction on free speech? Ironic, because Texas Governor Greg Abbott actually said that, in Texas college campuses, even outsiders can come to campus and demonstrate to the best of their ability. It was
2021, I think.
2019. He wrote
a little earlier, yeah.
Yeah, he signed legislation into law, which he has personally violated himself by using the government. So free
Are you
speech.
talking about the recent one?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
no matter what happens, like the idea that like every single protest has to go through like a permits process is obviously, I think, a little bit ridiculous, because like it is there, that permit process is there to like genuinely make the state restrict certain kinds of speech and only allow other kinds of speech to exist, which in my opinion is in direct violation of the First Amendment in the way that we understand it. So people make laws all the time.
Oh yeah, of course they do. And yeah, I see what you're saying. Absolutely. And I think that there's probably a middle ground with that, where it's like if people are protesting and there's a tent there, it's okay. Probably not a really big deal. But I still do think that the university, or especially other like private businesses, should have every right to tell people not to be there, because it's also their private property. Like, I think somebody's right to protest is really important, but I think it's also important that somebody has a right to have autonomy over their own property, especially.
It's not their property. It's public property. It's not private property. It's a public school. Not. That's why he already said that.
Whenever if something happens to somebody there, they could get sued for it too. So, and I think that that's really kind of what the problem with like a lot of this is that I think that like you and I probably align with a lot of the different like opinions that we have in terms of like Israel or Zionism or anything like that. I just don't really think that these methods are effective. And I think that they alienate a lot more people than they bring in.
I think if the student protests were not effective, they would not have actually had multiple universities at this point meet their demands, like in Northwestern and in Brown University, and now, as recently as a couple hours ago, Rutgers University has met the demands of Students for Justice for Palestine, which has led to the peaceful dispersal of the encampments. But beyond that, I think that another testament to the success of these protests is the violent reaction of the state, because in some ways, like police behaving in this way also galvanizes a lot of the protesters. As a matter of fact, like this entire conversation started originally quietly at Vanderbilt University, where a couple of fans of mine, as a matter of fact, got suspended from school for doing an encampment. Then students at Columbia University saw that and said, that's bull. We should divest as well. And then their encampment began after that. And then they got suppressed by the police, and then their encampment grew. And now this is in almost every single state, with the exception of, I think, like 10 at this point, and also happening globally, as a matter of fact. So in a way, they were profoundly successful. So successful that
you know a lot more about this than I do. So I'm kind of curious. So you're talking about like how Brown University and a lot of these other universities successful, the students have had their demands met. And so whenever you say that, oh, okay. Well, the ones that have, did they ever like have the police remove the encampments? Because like I think if the university is allowing it to happen, then I feel like the protest is totally justified. It's completely fine.
No, there was police presence on all the campuses as well, and the police actually said that they would be interested in violently dispersing the encampments even at Rutgers University, but the administration looked at the demands and found them to be reasonable. See, the thing is, there's two ways to always deal with conflict management, no matter what. You either escalate,
the college was completely fine with the encampment. They weren't fine with the encampments. They just saw what the demands were and found them reasonable, and was just like, yeah, we can meet these. Like it's not like they missed the encampment. It's not like, oh, but can you guys like keep the encampment going? Like, no, they're just like, it's not about whether or not they want the encampment there. It's about whether or not they respond to it with police violence, like allowing the police to violently disperse this encampment. That has nothing to do with it. That's a weird phrasing of this. That kind of shows that he doesn't really know what all this is. Of like the college allowing these encampments to be there. Like it's not like these colleges were hoping that these encampments would just show up one day. Just be like, oh man, I can't wait for this encampment. I can't wait. Like, no, it's just so dumb.
Use the violent arm of the state to violently apprehend students, break apart the encampments, use pepper spray, tear gas, and rubber bullets that cops literally shot some of the members of my community in the face with last night. And
I mean, to be fair, whenever I watched the whole thing happen.
Yeah, and those things were huge. Those rubber bullets are huge. There were photos that were leaked of like the bullets that were being used. You would think they were used for other purposes, because Jesus Christ, they were like, nobody should ever be shot anywhere with something like that.
I didn't really see a lot of the police officers shooting people that weren't shooting fire extinguishers at them. Like, I'm sorry, but I think if you are spraying a fire extinguisher at a police officer, I think they have every right to shoot you with a rubber bullet. You shouldn't be doing that. It's disgusting.
Well,
that's insane. If you're shooting a fire extinguisher at someone, they should get to shoot you with a rubber bullet. It's absolutely insane.
I don't know if it would shock you to find out, but rubber bullets are not supposed to be directed directly at protesters. It's supposed to be a less than lethal apprehension method or riot control method. And when they actually do shoot someone in the face, they can kill them.
To the people, like you're not
No,
supposed
they're
to
supposed to. Yeah, against fire extinguishers, what they're supposed to do is shoot it on the ground. These guys were directly aiming it at the faces of students. And also,
sure
it wasn't just students that were holding fire extinguishers. It was pretty much anyone and everyone. It was it was basically a kill zone. You can kill people with rubber bullets, by the way. That's why they call it less than lethal.
Yeah, no, you definitely can. But I'm not going to tell the police officers they're wrong for defending themselves against somebody who's blowing a fire extinguisher at
Oh
them.
my god, that's so fucking stupid. Yeah, it's so. I don't even know what to say because that's so stupid. They're defending themselves against a fire extinguisher. So dumb. Yeah, they're being hit by a fire, like they're getting sprayed with a fire extinguisher, so they have every right to fucking kill these students. Because he's right. Rubber bullets can fucking kill people if you shoot them especially if you shoot them in the fucking face. Like, yeah, they're less lethal than actual bullets, but that doesn't mean they can't kill people.
That's ridiculous.
I think
that they should have every right to defend themselves against that. Like,
do you think the students have a right to defend themselves?
They weren't being attacked.
Wait,
they weren't being shot.
No, the cops were at that point. The cops were apprehending them. They were arresting them on site.
Yeah, because they were breaking the law, and the university wanted them off the campus, and they have every right to ask them to leave the campus. They didn't do it, and of course the cops would have to remove them. Like,
let me ask you this way: do you think it's do you find it to be a just and proportionate response to unarmed students? And many of them, almost all of them, are unarmed, and the ones that had, I guess, fire extinguishers is few.
This is so stupid at being like, well, it's against the law though, so they have every right to attack these students. He's no different. Like, if this was a civil rights movement, he would basically be like, well, it's illegal. Like, he would be on the cop side. Like, yeah, it was illegal for black people to be certain places. They couldn't be in certain restaurants. They couldn't use certain water fountains. With his logic, that would basically be like saying like, well, a black person had every right to be arrested by the police officer because that's not the restaurant they're supposed to be in. Like, it's this cowardly way of being like, yeah, I'm in, like, I think it's fine to protest, like I'm on their side, but also they should follow the law. It's a cowardly way of trying to talk about this.
Do you think it's an appropriate response to violently, in full riot gear, violently apprehend and assault students because they are peacefully demonstrating, but the university now has demanded that they disperse?
Well, I think there's two different categories of that. So for the students that are not being violent, because a lot of the students were being violent, they were throwing things at the cops, they were spraying fire extinguishers at them. I'm sorry, but that's not a peaceful protest. If you're spraying a fire extinguisher at a police officer, you're not being peaceful. So if the police officer is violent in return, I actually think
it wasn't part of. Well, they're trying to defend themselves. They're trying to defend their encampment from being taken over, basically be ripped apart by these police officers. Like, that's the whole thing. Like, they're doing it in retaliation, because they don't want their encampment to be ripped, because that is breaking up the protest. It's just whatever.
Totally fine.
No, well, here's the thing. That's the reason why this is really important, right? Like, the reason why, like, I'm glad I went to the encampment. I'm glad that, like, all this was filmed. It was peaceful until the police came with weapons and with riot gear and started apprehending with physical force the students. If you look at the visuals from before the police officers actually came onto campus, it was actually quite peaceful. People are dancing, people are singing, people are eating food and chilling overall. It's actually the university that, and this is what many students are saying as well, both at Columbia University, even students who might not have agreed with the overall cause of the protest, now feel that the university has left them out and compromised their safety personally by bringing outsiders, specifically cops, to come in and violently apprehend students who weren't doing anything, who weren't harming anyone, who were simply demanding in the most peaceful way they possibly can, like literally, that the university divest from a violent state that they are funding and facilitating.
And I get that. I also totally disagree with it. I think the university should have every right to decide who is and isn't on their property.
Again, this is, you agree with it, but you strongly disagree with it. Like, then what? It's such a cowardly, eccentric take that he is taking on this entire issue. It's just completely fucked.
And I think in the instances that you were giving me an example of earlier, like Brown, I think that Brown didn't ask the police to come in, and Brown allowed those protests to happen. And I think that's totally fine. But if the university doesn't want those people there, I think that at a certain point, they have every right to have the police come in
Brown
and remove them.
University was just like, no, we want these protests to happen. Like, what? Like, what is, like, does he think everything needs to be controlled by, like, the board? Or is control, like, I don't see his logic here.
And the truth is that I don't think that the police were overly violent to a lot of those people. I really don't. I think.
I mean, there's a lot of visuals of people like bleeding profusely from the head, either due to getting hit in the head. But that's violence, right? Like that's.
It's just violence because it is like there's no other. So here's an interesting question, right? So like, what would you propose as an alternative to that? Like, how would you solve?
Great.
Yeah,
great question. So my solution to this would be exactly what Brown and all of these other campuses did, which is to allow the protest to continue and also meet the demands to the best of your ability and take an honest negotiation effort with the students. Because ultimately, if you believe personally that these students are in the right, and it seems like you specifically do think that these students are making just demands.
Yeah, they are.
Right.
They have every right to protest. And like, for example, like at UT here, like we had a lot of protests, and it was very disappointing for me to see a lot of people in my chat and just in the community in general that were celebrating whenever the police were coming in and removing them, because these people were not being violent. They weren't breaking the law. They were just protesting, and I completely support that.
Yeah, but until the university decides.
Yeah, but then you saw what happened at UCLA, where they weren't being violent until the police showed up, where they were being extremely peaceful. Even when the counter protesters showed up and tried to dismantle the encampment and beat the shit out of them, you fucking cheered it on. Like, you're no different from your chat in that instance when it came to the UCLA and the police breaking up that encampment where you were cheering it on. How are you, like, you're just, honestly, you're just calling yourself disgusting at that point because you can't see the differences between the two.
That they can't, is what you're saying,
Right.
for UCLA.
Yeah,
so
that's my perspective.
So if the UT, University of Texas Austin administration saying like we don't want these protests on campus, leading to a police response would be just then. But because you're
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that it really kind of depends on the situation. In general, I think the answer to that is probably yes. But I'm sure that there are probably some circumstances, especially with people that are just there and not taking up space and they're just talking and not really like obstructing anyone, not setting up encampments, and they're just there. Yeah, I would think that's really kind of up for them to remove them for that reason. But in the context of what happened at UCLA, I don't think that it was up because it had been going on for multiple days, and like it doesn't, like, I mean, let's be real, who really gives about the the pavement and everything? But they are graffitiing everything and they're destroying a lot of things. Like I see windows getting knocked out. I don't
think there were any windows knocked out at UCLA. You might be confusing that with Columbia. And the only windows that were knocked out.
Right. That's what I was saying in multiple places. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So Columbia University, they broke into Hamilton Hall to take it over, which is, again, I will defend that as well. I have defended that. I think that's perfectly valid. Because
I don't know.
It's trespassing, right?
Yeah, well, it's not just trespassing. It's like breaking, like you're breaking the windows to trespass, right? It's one thing like, we just walked in.
Material damage facilities. Yeah, material damage to facilities is like is an injustice, is what you're saying here in this situation. Which you might have that opinion.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
If you're caring more about buildings in this case than peaceful protesters being stomped out and thrown downstairs by police, I don't feel like you have any right to talk about the situation.
So then, don't you think that the university's reaction by sending thousands, using millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars, and sending in thousands of cops to break every door inside of Hamilton Hall and most of the windows outside of Hamilton Hall caused an infinite more amount of material damage than just simply meeting the students halfway at the bargaining table?
I completely agree with it. And the reason why is because it's their property to damage, and they have every right to do that. And the law has to...
It's the police property? No, it's not. Like, it's not like the campus, it's not like the college board was just like, yeah, it's completely fine if you just break the door down. Like, no.
Be upheld to a degree.
But doesn't that mean that like the university kind of doesn't give a shit about the material harm in that circumstance? Because if they cared about what happens to the two windows,
well, it's not about the material harm necessarily. It's about having the autonomy of the material harm and being able to decide what you do with your own material and what you do with your own property and what you don't do with it. And I think that's extremely.
Yeah, but they're not the ones doing it. It's the police doing it.
Important. And it's worth more, and it's more important than any actual material or piece of property in itself. It's the essence that somebody has their own autonomy to decide what they do with what they own.
Because one of the things that they also did at Columbia was falsely claim that like these students were actually harming and being anti-Semitic and like scaring Jewish students, even though ironically Jewish students were overrepresented in those arrested in the first sweep. So once again, it's the university that is claiming that police action must be met, like police action must occur upon these students because they have made up a fake reason, a bullshit reason really, that these students are somehow scaring the student population and threatening them when no such evidence existed for that, only to cause far greater harm to the student population because then they violently assaulted and arrested hundreds of students. So it's like it's a bit of a I'm cutting my nose to spite my face situation, don't you think?
But it's their face to cut, and it's their decision.
Not really, because it is
Well,
the
it
students.
really is because it's their right, it's their business, and they're not business.
It's no, because it's being done onto the students, not themselves. It's not like they're calling the police on themselves and saying, "Hey, you can violently arrest us." That's no, unless you think that the students are property of the college, which is fucked up.
Business, I guess you could say.
It
But
is
it's
a
their
business.
university.
No, universities are business for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that in some cases you're probably right. And I think also like a lot of the people that were being violently arrested, I think it takes two to tango in a lot of cases. And I think a lot of these people are being violently arrested, but they're also not complying with what the police are wanting. They're actively breaking the law. And I don't think that's something like how do you.
So do you think? Would you say that the George Floyd, what happened with him, was justified? Like it's just, or like people who are being violently attacked if they try to resist, that's justified if the police brutalize them. Just complete, just so stupid.
Like,
So,
and
you bring up a
this is
really good
like
point.
Like, well, like, let me, like, yeah, how do you deal with a person that is actively resisting you and won't obey the law? Because I feel like you have to restrain them somehow, don't you?
So you actually bring up a really good point that I love this conversation. This is not a gotcha at all. Have you ever been arrested?
No, I have not.
Okay, so I have.
I've been pulled over. I've been like detained, but I've never been arrested.
Yeah, so I have. And it's not. I promise you, it's not a gotcha at all. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because resisting arrest is what is always like a tack-on charge.
Yeah.
Because cops, oftentimes, I'm sure you've seen like body camera footage. Well, they'll be like, "Oh, stop resisting," while they literally have like their knee on the neck of a suspect already.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? That's on the ground. And
Yeah.
it's technically a bullshit charge, and here's why. Because getting handcuffed physically, like physical restriction, physical apprehension, is actually done in such a way that your body cannot contort in that way. So your body naturally reacts when your arms are behind your back and you're being placed in handcuffs. So it's actually one of those laws.
Especially when someone's forcing you to do it too. Like, especially when like someone's literally grabbing your arm and like putting it to your back, you're more than likely just on instinct or on reflexes just going to like put it back to where you had it when someone's just grabbing it and pulling it back. Like, yeah, it is a bullshit charge. Like, it doesn't show actual, like, it's something that can just get slapped on without actual like intent. Like, it's just something that like they can just put on there neatly. Just be like, we don't need to actually see why they were resisting or why we claim they were resisting. The fact is that because they jerked back because we grabbed their arm and put it behind their back, because they jerked a little bit on reflex, we can just add on resisting arrest.
That is basically designed because it's the physical natural response to you being apprehended. So many times, in many instances, like it's basically there so that it gives cops just cause to say, well, we're using force because you're forcibly resisting. When in fact, many people who are being arrested in a lot of circumstances are not physically, like directly, violently trying to resist in the way that you and I would understand it, like, you know, punching a cop or you know what I mean? Like, or like not complying. But in many circumstances, they actually are simply trying to comply. In many body camera footage, we see that too, where they're like, I'm not resisting. And they just keep saying, stop resisting. It's because your body is physically moving in that way naturally. It's designed in a way to just add on to the charges to justify after the fact. Once you have decided to apprehend someone physically.
And you're saying this is what's happening whenever you get handcuffed?
Yeah, 100%. And another charge that they're using in UCLA.
Resisting though, right? Because like, you know, I think that there are a lot of instances where somebody is resisting arrest and it's not because of a body contortion reason. They're running away from police or trying to push them away. I mean, you can't have that. I mean, I'll grant you the handcuff thing. Sure. I mean, I think that there are a lot of cases where like cops are unnecessarily violent and they escalate the situation in a way that they shouldn't. And I think that's bad. Absolutely.
I'll give you another perspective that's also even crazier than that. Are you ready for this? It's going to blow your mind. In Germany, it is technically not illegal to try to escape prison. Did you know this?
No, I didn't know that.
Because under the German understanding of human law, they believe that obviously all men want freedom. So it is a perfectly natural and perfectly valid response to being apprehended and being put in prison. So technically, when you do try to escape prison in Germany, if you do actually escape prison in Germany, the only charges they will add on is if you are escaping with the state's clothes. Like if you're wearing prisoner garb, they will say,
effectively stealing.
Yeah, like in America, if you obviously try to escape prison, like that's a charge in and of itself. In Germany, they don't even have that. They don't consider that to be an additional offense to add on to your record.
Yeah, which is also kind of funny because even then you can get Like, unless you literally have like a perfect change of clothes to get into, like you're probably just gonna like even if you took the clothes off, you're just gonna be escaping naked, and they could get you on a nudity like a public nudity charge. Like oh at least like public indecency or something like that. Like I think that's pretty funny. It's just like it is a way of kind of getting around it because like either unless you literally find a way to find clothes that aren't owned by the state into the prison so you can change out of them and escape, you're either going to get charged with like stealing state clothes or just being nude or being naked. I just think that's
because
pretty
they
funny. It has
consider
nothing
that
really
to
to
be
do
the
with
natural
the
predisposition of humans that they want to be free. It's just the
Oh,
reason why I brought it
absolutely.
up is because like a lot of laws are designed around the culture and whatever our material conditions are, whatever we want the criminal justice system to do, and that is precisely the reason why the application of like things such as trespassing or things such as like lawful dispersal are oftentimes simply charges that we've created so the state can suppress free speech without, saying we are doing this because we don't like what you're saying. But that doesn't change the reality that it's a bullshit charge, a tack-on charge, or a charge that they're using specifically to actually violently suppress free speech.
I don't agree with that. I don't, because like there are a lot of instances where they're trying to arrest somebody and the person is actively trying to fight them and stop them from arresting them. Like, how can you have a world where that's acceptable? Like, wouldn't that massively endanger the lives of every single police officer?
It depends on which country we're talking about, I guess. But
well, in the US, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, whatever Germany does is what they're going to do. But it's like I can't see a world where being able to resist arrest is like not going to lead to massive risks of violence against police officers.
It's the application of the law. I think that there should be probably a higher standard for things such as this, because obviously, like, as long as it's not violent, as long as it's not like genuinely causing harm to others, I think that a trespass law in this situation, especially because it is public land, trespass in this circumstance is, in my opinion, not meeting the standard of violent state apprehension. If it was something else, if these students were like beating the randomly out of like students that are walking around, then well, you have a specific charge for that, right? Yeah. I think that trespass is just a bullshit one to use in this circumstance, especially after the vice chancellor, hours prior to the sweep, actually went and sat down with the students. And
Are
in
you
that
talking
conversation,
about in UCLA?
yeah. And the vice chancellor made it seem as though they were doing this to protect the students. They were claiming that, they wanted police presence there to protect the students. And the students kept asking him whether there would be a sweep at all, because police presence in this circumstance would not actually mean safety for the students or security for the students, but the exact opposite. And he basically said, oh, no, there won't be a sweep, or maybe there will be a sweep, but you'll be able to leave before the sweep, giving them only one option, which is leave or get beaten up. I don't think that's valid to do.
I think it kind of is in a lot of circumstances. And the reason why is because the alternative to that is that you are effectively holding the university hostage. And I don't think that's fair.
But they're not. Wait,
well, they kind of are. Whenever they're saying we won't leave until you do what we want, and then you can't make them leave, they are effectively holding this.
That's not holding them hostage, though. They can still go on day-to-day basis. Again, they're not blocking any of the entrances to the building. They're not actively trying to stop people from going to class. They're not actively trying to stop teachers from going to class. Like, they can still operate day-to-day. It's not like what we were talking about with like Samuel Jackson, where they were literally holding board members like against their will. They were just like, hey, we're going to put an encampment here, and we're not going to leave until you meet our demands, but we're also not going to stop your day-to-day operations. Like, it is a very peaceful way. Like, the university could have just continued to operate day-to-day, but they chose not to. They decided to cut off access to buildings, they decided to cancel classes. In response to this, that was their choice. It wasn't the encampment, the protesters telling them they had to do that.
Space hostage, are they not?
I mean, the space that they're occupying is marginal. They could even hold an actual space hostage, I guess, like if they were to go inside of a building and set up barricades and whatnot. And at which point, what I care about is what their goals are, right? Because all matter of protest is inevitably going to be disruptive. This one wasn't. That's why I think it's like truly unconscionable, the reaction from the university, and that's why there's a lot of students who are very pissed off right now at UCLA who think like this was unacceptable, because these students did not go above and beyond. They didn't do other things like actually block students from going to class. That never actually happened, or even like block students or block faculty. As a matter of fact, faculty and teachers under UAW 4811, the local UAW for the grad student union and the teachers union there, specifically specifically were participating in the protest against the police presence, thinking that like at least if the teachers are there, the cops will be less likely to beat the shit out of the people, and that still didn't stop them. That's why you see images of like deans.
Of like that lady, yeah.
Yeah, you see images everywhere of like there was a lady who is the head of Jewish studies at one of the universities that literally was physically assaulted by the police. She's a Jewish woman. She's a professor. She's the head of the Jewish cultural studies at the school, and cops are beating the shit out of her for saying that like Israel is doing a genocide. I don't think that any of these. I guess like the thing that annoys me the most about this stuff and the way that it's covered in mainstream media is the hypocrisy of it all. Beyond the obvious issues, beyond my own personal perspective on the matter, beyond the fact that I think it's truly unconscionable that our tax dollars are going to fund and facilitate ruthless baby slaughter overseas instead of, helping Americans, helping
Almost
people
here, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
helping
and
homeless people here.
I agree with you on that perspective.
Beyond that fact, the idea that these guys are somehow doing this to combat anti-Semitism is truly, truly ridiculous, especially when in many instances, the people that they're beating up are Jewish students and also Jewish members of faculty, in some instances, literal Holocaust survivors that go and participate at these protests. So it's all bullshit. Like the reasoning that the media gives is bullshit. Justifications that universities give is ultimately bullshit. They just don't want this kind of protest to occur. They just don't want it at all. They want everyone to shut the fuck up and say that you love Israel unconditionally and that you should make no demands from the university whatsoever. And
well, I think that the university isn't, at liberty to be held accountable by anybody who wants to get together and hold them accountable, even if it's students. Like, I agree with you that like all of these things are bad, but just because something is bad, that doesn't necessarily greenlight any behavior you take in order to hold somebody accountable for it. So like, while yeah, I think that it's absolutely fair for the students to want to, protest to make the university divest.
So what to you is a perfect protest then? What to you is the perfect protest for these students? What is it? Because even when they do it in the most peaceful way possible, apparently that's still not enough for you. What is your way of doing it? What is your perfect protest? Because from just how you're talking about it, it seems like it's almost nothing at this point. Like, what is the peaceful? Well, okay, they can't be on any sort of property that's not. What are they supposed to go to a public park that has nothing to do with the college? What would that do? What? And even then, he'll probably still complain like, "Oh, it's being disruptive to people who are just there to enjoy their day." Like, what to you is the perfect protest? Is it standing outside the college? Well, that's blocking people from using the sidewalk. What to you is the perfect protest? Because it seems like it's nothing.
Not be involved with those things. Absolutely, that's fair. But whenever you do it in a way that the university doesn't want you to, I think that yes, they have every right to have you removed because that's the way the law works. And I think that's what I would say if it was a Walmart doing this or a Starbucks or a person at their house or anything. Because again, a person should have autonomy and the right to decide what they do with their own space. And also, it's not like the protesters are speaking for every student. There are a lot of students that probably are, like kind of neutral about the topic or might even disagree with it.
Would it shock you to find out? And I know that this is like not something that mainstream media covers at all. But for example, students hold votes. Like student government body will hold votes for divestment. In Colombia, 90% of the student body voted in favor of divestment. 90% in Columbia University. So it's actually not about democracy. It's the exact opposite. It is not meeting the demands of the students or the interests of the students whatsoever. Because I'm sure many students, much like yourself, would probably agree that it is kind of ridiculous that we're, participating. Our tuition dollars are going to like baby murder machine, right? And for the record, historically, the reason why I brought up like 1968 and many other instances because in 1985 specifically, Columbia University students and students across the board, across the United States of America, originally did the BDS movement and did the exact same things, if not more violent at that time, as a matter of fact, and successfully were able to get their universities to concede to the reasonable demands that they were making, which was to divest from apartheid South Africa. That's the history that these students are relying on, and they're hoping, understandably so, that these institutions that are supposed to be there to educate them will be human and will be reasonable.
I get that. Well, they're trying to get the institutions to come to the table. And my point of view is that I don't think the institutions should be made to come to the table. I think that you should have every right to try to get them to do it. But the idea that you're going to hold spaces hostage or destroy property.
The fact that there have been institutions that have went to the table and they were able to meet the demands of protesters obviously shows that it's possible and that it should be the stand of like, hey, just meet with these people who aren't doing any harm to anyone. They just want you to hear them out. It's the least they could do, and they're still not doing it, and they're actively trying to harm the students themselves. Like, I don't know how you can look at that and be in support of it.
Or do really anything that violates their rights or violates their autonomy of their own property and what they have control over. That's what I disagree with.
But
I don't have
okay.
a problem with people being angry about it. And also, like, anybody can, like, people don't have to go to that school. They're choosing to go to that school. And the student votes are not.
Most colleges do this. There's a reason why it's widespread throughout the nation of multiple colleges facing protests like this. It's because it's many different colleges that are doing this. And at the same time, it's not like they went into that being like aware. Some of these students more than likely weren't aware of what these colleges were sending their money to, of what, like, their ties to these companies. It's not on them to know, like, where their money is going. Like, it should be the college's responsibility to use it appropriately.
Like, a university is not a democratic republic. It's not a democracy. So the student votes matter, and I think that.
Well, I think it should be. Like,
Yeah.
if you were to ask them, they would say that they are a place for learning, where they do care about their students' interests and stuff, and they wouldn't. Like,
Well,
if you
and
were to
that's-
ask them, they wouldn't disagree with that statement, I think.
Well, I think that it depends on whether that statement is convenient for them.
Yeah,
But the
no,
truth
they're
is,
hypocritical, for sure.
oh, absolutely. But it's still their right to be hypocritical. And
So-
I'm not, and I think this is like kind of two different conversations, and we could be talking a bit past each other, but I think that really they should have the final say in whether they do this or not do it. But I do agree with you in essence that what they're doing is hypocritical, and I also think that it's bad. I think that they're wrong. I just think that it's important that people have the right to do what they want to do, and they can't be intimidated or bullied into doing what a mob of people tells them to do. I think that's extremely scary, and that's worse than almost anything else.
Wait, really? You would prefer rather that, like, because the difference between the majority, the tyranny of majority, is the tyranny of minority. So you're saying you prefer the tyranny of minority to the tyranny of majority?
Well,
the tyranny of majority is democracy, right?
Well, like, let's think about this a little bit more logically. So I see what you're saying, and that's an interesting point, but I don't think it really applies here. Because, for example, if a lot of people are around, like, some sort of, I don't know, grocery store, and there's more people that want to get the food out of the grocery store than the people that work at the grocery store, then you would have a majority of people that you could logically say, based off of democracy, should be able to do that. But the truth is that it's not tyranny of the majority or the minority. It's tyranny of the people who have the rights and the ownership of what they have those rights and ownership to, and their autonomy to decide what they want to do with that. So it's neither.
I'm a little confused by your example, because in this circumstance, it's like outsiders.
Yeah.
Like the example that you're using would actually be best explained with strikes, right? Because the analog here is actually grocery store workers who participate and work at the grocery store, like clerks and whatnot, who are a part of, let's say, some kind of collective bargaining, some kind of union, decide that they are generating a shit ton of profits for the Walmart family, the Waltons, right? And they're saying, I think we want.
I know.
What's up?
Oh, I worked at Sam's Club for a week, and in orientation, they even had things on the wall saying how bad unions were.
Oh, yeah.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. I love Sam's Club. Costco's probably better. Costco's a little bit better for their workers, but I was in awe of Sam's Club when I first came to America. I thought this is the greatest thing America's ever invented.
Sam's Club has better pizza, man. It's really good.
But yeah. But the thing is, in that circumstance, right, the majority of workers at Sam's Club would potentially stop, or Walmart would potentially stop people from going into Walmart, which has historically been done for not just Walmart, but, like, it's been done time and time again. And these examples of protest are disruptive at the time, and possibly even very annoying for those who just want to get their fucking food and get the fuck out, and they don't want to think about it. But ultimately, movements like this have created a lot of the rules and a lot of the freedoms that we now take for granted, including things like the weekend, including the abolition of child labor, even though it's coming back to America, to many different states right now. Workplace protections, things of that nature. So the reason why I am on board with these students is not because they're, like, doing unimaginably peaceful protests, like much better in a much better way than I would ever be able to do it.
You're using an argument of basically the ends justify the means, right?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah, you are. And I understand
but only because like the ultimate goal is one that I agree with and I think is just, and I think you think is just as well.
And that's what I think is scary, though, right? Because once you create a foundation where that type of thinking is justified, then who's to stop people who disagree with you and want to do something bad for thinking and applying the same type of logic? And that's what I think is scary, because I think you're right.
That already
right?
exists. That is how most people approach matters.
Bad. It's also very bad, right? And what I'm saying is that I think there's a situation where in applications of the law, all of it is bad or none of it is bad. You can't have a thing where you kind of means test each individual person and each individual cause as to whether or not it's justifiably okay to break the law for this cause. I think that's very unfair, and I think also
that's not true, though. What you're saying is actually not correct. I just want to let you know. That's precisely the reason why the prosecutor's office in Texas, in Austin specifically, refused to prosecute all of the individuals that were apprehended by the Texas state troopers at the protest. So, like, leniency is exactly how the criminal justice system applies the means testing, I guess. And the reason for why they did that is because these guys were lawfully protesting and exercising their First Amendment rights.
They weren't doing anything wrong. Number one, like the people here at UT were doing nothing wrong. They should have never been apprehended.
Yeah,
there's no.
But the same fate will befall the UCLA students as well. And the reason for why they will inevitably not get any serious criminal charges or any charges whatsoever is because ultimately what they are doing is peaceful demonstration. The major purpose here of sending the police there is not actually to this is what is like on principle alone anti-American, in my opinion, if we are to believe the First Amendment is real and true and enshrined and protected by the Constitution, which is probably one of my favorite things about America, considering that I came from Turkey, and a lot of the shit that I say about the American government, or even the Turkish government, as a matter of fact, would lead me in serious criminal punishment in Turkey, my nation of origin.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there.
So that's why when I see stuff like this, when I see the state acting in this way, when I see the state like designing new bills that say like criticism of Israel is inherently anti-Semitic and should be illegal.
That's the one from today.
Yeah, when I see stuff like that, I am genuinely much more fearful about the future.
It's awful. It's
much more fearful about the future than like students actually protesting against their school.
God, like, and I remember Ben Shapiro is basically like, he doesn't think that the bill goes far enough or something like that. I'm not sure. He was complaining about the bill a little bit, not in the fact that like if you criticize Israel, not for that part. I think he was for the most part complaining about the Civil Rights Act and shit about that. But like that's just like we don't even have that with the Civil Rights Act. Like it's not like you can't say anything bad about another race, even though like you shouldn't. That's just something you shouldn't do. It's a lot different from like Israel is just a state. That's all it is. They like to make themselves out to be like this example for Jewish people. Like, oh, if you criticize Israel, you're being anti-Semitic because Israel encompasses like the Jewish collective. That's insane. That's not true. We see that with these protests, like. I mentioned before, a lot of like he mentioned before, there's a strong presence of Jewish people at these protests. There's also a strong presence of not even anti-Zionist Jewish people, but just Jewish people who aren't Zionists as a whole, who don't really care for Israel. Like, it's so stupid to lump in Israel with Jewish people as a whole, because it's not true. Jewish people have been around a lot longer than Israel as a state. A lot of Jewish people don't condone what Israel does and what it is doing right now. So trying to make any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic is completely disgusting.
In the most peaceful ways possible.
To be fair, I totally agree with you there. But I think maybe the difference is that I view these, like, in this circumstance, those two examples are both on the spectrum of not good or bad things, but you're absolutely...
Also, the problem with that is that it also just opens up the opportunity for them to completely just be like, any criticism towards the U.S. government is also bad. I mean, the way that they're doing it with Israel is combining it with anti-Semitism, trying to label it as anti-Semitism. But it just opens you up to a lot more suppression of free speech, of just being like anything that's against the U.S. government. Like, that's not allowed anymore. Like, it allows you to open the door to that kind of fascist movements. It's just completely insane.
You're right that the Israel thing, where you can't criticize Israel or say that people are working for Israel, it's fucking ridiculous. Like, it's astonishing to me that it's even considered.
So the question, I guess, is how do we resist against that, right? And I think the reason why the founding fathers enshrined the First Amendment in the Constitution was specifically because there should be healthy dissent against the government in order to stop the government from being tyrannical, from behaving in a tyrannical way, which is precisely the reason why I think that the UCLA students are totally in the right, and the university, instead of taking them seriously and trying to mediate the situation in the same way that other colleges have, seeking the rabid dogs of the state that fucking that cost LA taxpayers $2 to $8 million, $2 to $8 million a day. When, let me tell you, okay, if you get your fucking shit stolen out here, they're gonna be like, lol, okay, write a report, okay, and give it to your fucking insurance. It is it's the entitlement and the lack of interest in actually doing your job that really frustrates me about, especially Los Angeles Police Department. You and I both know two different people that have had their car stolen that the police did
Jesus
nothing about.
Christ,
Both
yes.
Ludwig and Myth
Yeah.
got their car stolen, and in both cases, the LAPD said, "Lol, sorry."
Yeah.
But then they have the capacity to fucking send thousands of Los Angeles Sheriff Department dudes rocking like tactical gear, riot gear, to beat the shit out of like otherwise peaceful protesters that are 18 years old. These are like queer anthropology students that are sitting in a fucking protest. They're a bunch of hippies, and they're getting brutally taken down by like 45-year-old dickheads from not even from here, from like one of these like edge cities that they all live in together, and coming to brutalize them. I think this is unjustifiable. I think that is a gross misuse of funds. And as a taxpayer who pays European level taxes, if not more, I wish that, I demand more of a return from the tax that I pay for. And I think it's, my honest American right to do so. Just like it's the right for these students to protest.
Well, I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. You can demand that as much as you want, but it doesn't mean you can go somewhere and just post up there and expect for people to just have to be okay with it. Like,
No.
I agree with you that the cops are probably, like, there are a lot of cases where the cops are incompetent, but like the dichotomy that you're creating between like, the police officers arresting the protesters and not getting the people who stole Myth or Ludwig's car, like, in my opinion, I think they should do both, because if you don't have law and you don't have rule of law and you can't apply the law, then everything is chaos. And everybody is making up their own rules constantly.
Well, I think the police were behaving in an unlawful way by going into a otherwise peaceful encampment and beating people and apprehending them. That's what I'm saying. I think it's a violation of the First Amendment to do so.
I think that it's, well, like, you don't view it as like, for example, like if somebody went onto your property, and I understand this is a public university, so it's different, but I do believe that going onto somebody's property and refusing to leave is violent. It is fundamentally violent. Like, you're not allowing somebody to access or to use part of their property that they own.
Yeah, but like this being different is important, though, because there's a difference in personal property, like your house or whatever, versus public property of a school that you are actually paying tuition to utilize the grounds on. Like, it's entirely different. That's why there's public spaces to begin with, so that people can protest in places like that, in parks and whatnot. So I guess the question I had for you at this point is, like, 1968, Vietnam War and civil rights protests are happening. They're much more violent, ultimately, than this round of protests that are occurring on college campuses. Like,
I don't understand how he doesn't budge on that. Like, he's been giving him example, like, no, this is why it's okay. Like, they're public spaces, and that's why it's perfectly fine for people to protest on them, and they're not blocking people's space. But he still won't budge on it. Like, he still keeps going back to it. Like, you've been proven wrong multiple times with this whole, well, it's wrong that they're on this property, and the college should have say in whether or not, like, they're allowed to have the encampment there or not. It's public. They can put the encampment there. It's not blocking anyone's space. It's been said multiple times, yet he keeps going back to it.
They agree with the ultimate solutions that occurred, right? Like ending the Vietnam War.
I don't know what his it's like Hasan keeps bringing up these points. It's not like if you keep mentioning it, he's just gonna forget his points at some point. Like, that's insane.
Well, that's really the thing, right? Is that so like I can see where you're going, and you can like kind of like redirect if it's not. But like basically my perspective is that I do agree with you on doing those things, but I think that if you use the argumentation of the ends justify the means, I don't
know how many more times we gotta hear him say, "Well, I agree with you, but actually, here's my problem." Like, that's been his entire thing so far. Like, Hasan will say, like, he'll make a point. Hasan will counter that point with like facts, and then he'll be like, "Well, I agree with you there, but." He's been doing it the entire time.
Can be used in a lot of ways that are extremely harmful. And I think that also they can always be used in very hypocritical ways, where the ends justify the means in things that I agree with, or you agree with, or somebody else agrees with, but not in cases where other people don't agree with it. And that's why I think that the only way to have any sort of a stable society is to have an official set of rules that everybody has to go off of. And if you start going off of that, or like diverging from that, everything becomes chaos, and everybody starts inventing their own rules, and you have situations like what's been happening. And I think it's worse for everybody. Like you said, it's millions of dollars that this costs, and I think the truth is that if you want to change things, there is a democratic process to change things. And with the university, people do have freedom.
But you did say that the democratic process is not going to work either in the case of Colombia, right?
Well, that's because it's not a democracy. But people can deal with it in a way that is democratic, which is simply choosing not to go there. So if people don't like what Colombia is doing, they can choose not to go to Colombia. So I don't really see the problem here. Why does Colombia have to, agree with these people or bow down to them if these people don't even need to be there?
So that's a great question. And the best answer perhaps comes from James Baldwin, American writer and civil rights activist, who once famously said, and I don't want to paraphrase it, so I'm going to give you the actual quote here, said, "I love America more than any other country in the world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." This is the exact same answer that I give to people as well whenever they tell me, "Why don't you fucking leave America if you're such a goddamn hater of America?" Now, the reason why I have the financial freedom.
Well, this is effectively the same quote as like the, I don't agree with what you're saying, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. So I agree with you. I think so, but I don't think all types of criticism are the same. So yeah, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, no, what I was trying to point to here with this quote is that I think that you and I both agree that dissent is healthy, right? And
Yeah,
I think that
absolutely.
I think that there are, as I've explained earlier, all throughout history we have had people who believe that their cause is righteous and their cause is just, and that their means actually their ends justify their means, right? Their methods of protest. And that is, I'm thankful, I guess, for people of the past for demonstrating the courage against the state apparatus that violently chooses to suppress them, so that I can live in a country or I can live in a world where people have shown that courage time and time again to bring us all of the amenities and all the freedoms that we now take for granted. Whether
It's
it be
a great place to be.
yeah, whether it be the American Revolution early on, which was a bourgeois revolution altogether, and there's still a lot of faults in America, but America shows a lot of promise, which it fails to meet on a regular basis. But ultimately, I choose to live here, right? And it is
I
because
love America. I think America's great. Yeah, I
it is
totally agree with
because
you. And
well,
well,
what
you're
I'm
going
trying
to
to
say probably the same thing, right? Is you're going to say because you care about it so much, that's why you're so critical and that's why you're so hostile about things that you don't believe in. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Which is why I think which is why I think it's wrong that the state acted in the way that it did in this circumstance. And not only is it wrong, but I also think it's hypocritical that they acted this way. This doesn't mean that, like, for example, in a hypothetical, like if a school shooter is fucking barricading himself into a school and holding a bunch of children hostage, that like I don't expect the state to be violent. You know what I mean? Of course, I expect I expect them to not do what they did at Uvalde. I expect them to to be as militant as they are against like a blue-haired queer English major at UCLA.
Right.
Except they don't do that, but that's besides the point. There's a whole different litany of problems. So I'm simply stating that in order for the state to react this way, I think there needs to be a bar. There needs to be a bar. There needs to be a standard, in my opinion, and that standard was certainly not met in this circumstance. And it's not just because the ends justify the means, but that does play a role in it, because I do think that they're like I'm going to be intellectually honest and not act like I'm taking no stances here. I do agree with this cause. I do agree with the cause of the students, but beyond that, I think that their methods overall were of a peaceful nature, and I think that the school reacting in this way by sending the cops to brutally arrest these kids was genuinely fucked up, like really fucked up.
Where do you think that bar is?
And scary as well. What do I think that bar is? I think I think when you do actually engage in direct acts of violence, it makes your cause definitely a lot less palatable to many others.
You don't view like blocking access or trespassing as a direct act of violence?
No, I mean definitionally under the legal code, trespass is not considered a violent act.
Oh yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah, I don't agree that I don't think that it should be considered that.
I think blocking access in some cases can be, however.
Yes, if you're like technically kidnapping someone, if you're like restricting their movement, then yes, you are doing that. But these students weren't doing that. The way I see it is like everyone dances around the rules, right? Like to the best of their ability, which is precisely the reason why, like, I guess it's like what these guys were doing is, in some ways, even though their cause is just, and I agree with their methods, and I probably would defend them if they were way worse than they are currently for that reason. I'm being very honest here. In this circumstance, especially, the students setting up an encampment and not allowing like random people who are like very obviously there to agitate, with the exception of like students that are genuinely, honestly, and earnestly trying to lend their support, was for good reason, so that they don't have like random fucking Nazis showing up at their doorstep and saying a whole bunch of like fucked up things that would put a lot of the Jewish students there in direct danger as well. To be like, oh yeah, free Palestine, also fuck the Jews, that kind of thing. Not only looks bad optically, but it also is not only looks bad optically, but is also putting the Jewish students at that encampment in harm's way. So I think that I guess the comparison is kind of like if there's a family on that courtyard having a picnic, right? Just because you're a student, that would not give you the right to like step on the picnic while they're having a meal as a family.
Well, let's use the picnic analogy, right? And like, so if the picnic lasts for 6 days, do you think the university should have a right to tell the picnic people to leave?
I don't think the picnic would last for.
No. I mean, first of all, that's ridiculous. A picnic wouldn't last 6 days. I mean, I know where he's coming from, but like, the picnic isn't disrupting people. The picnic isn't like stopping the flow, like the day-to-day operations of the campus, of the college. So no, not really. I think, and especially if that resulted in the college calling the police to come and get the people who were at the picnic, and it ended with them like brutalizing them, then yes. But like, then that would be completely unjust. Then they have every right to do that. That's not a good analogy.
Because at that point, it would be something different than a picnic.
Right? I mean, at a certain point, like I do think that they do have the right to get rid of them. Like I agree with you, right?
Well, I don't think the university.
Here's the limit.
No, you're absolutely right. The difference is there have been demonstrations such as that in times past in many other college campuses, And more often than not, they just kind of wait it out and have people leave, or they're like, all right, what the fuck is going on? And UCLA could have reacted in the same exact way that other colleges have reacted, like I mentioned, and tried to find a amicable and peaceful solution instead of actually greatly escalating to violent means by utilizing the police force and greatly putting students in danger of physical violence. That's my main anger here.
I get that. I think the students put themselves in danger. They were told by the cops to leave, and they didn't do it. It's not their property. They weren't allowed to be on there. They were told to leave. They didn't leave. They are putting themselves in that position by their actions. Like, I mean, these aren't children, right? These are adults, and they're smart people that are going to this college in a lot of the circumstances. They know exactly what the ramifications of their actions are. So
that's why this protest is, that's what they're doing is brave in many different ways because of the potential for state suppression. Okay, so I guess the question, like I said, with 1968 and whatnot, is that like, I don't think you would, like, as far as all the protests that have happened in the past, like the 1985 anti-apartheid protests, similar counter perspectives were brought up in this circumstance in each of these individual cases. I've also maintained that, or I have also shown, I think, with enough historical precedence that like the government doesn't simply offer people nice things because of the kindness of their hearts. People have to demand those nice things.
Well, you have to vote for them, really.
Yeah, well, that too, for sure. But sometimes it goes beyond voting because sometimes the state will refuse what you voted for democratically and will say, no, we're not going to do it. So I guess the question is always like, what is to be done? Like, what are people supposed to do? Because there's this idea, I think it was JFK who said it, that a violent retaliation to what is it? It's like, I think violent suppression of peaceful action makes violent retaliation a necessity.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah. I think we're saying the same thing. Like, I know what you're talking about, and so yeah, I feel like you're definitely right, and that nonviolent action I think should be not going to that university. Don't go there. Vote for things and vote for people that.
I mean, I already talked about it, so I'll just let it
will represent your interests in a way that's on.
They're not going to these universities knowing what these companies are contributing to, and just being like, oh, you can just stop going to that university. There's a lot of things to consider about that. First of all, that person, even if that person, just like where that person came from originally before going to that university, some of these kids probably are, like some of these students probably live in California, so to them it was just easier to live there. They probably couldn't afford to go to another state or go out of state to go to college. And even then, the people who did go out of state to go to UCLA, maybe it's probably not easy for them to go back or just change where they're going. Like, it's just being like, oh, well, just don't go there. It's a really stupid take on this, because there's a bunch of different factors outside of the fact that many colleges have this problem. That's the thing of contributing to giving their money to companies that help out with the Israeli war machine.
Authentic and will enable you to change policy in a way that you think reflects what your views are. I totally agree with that, and that's what I think needs to happen much more, because I think that a lot of people in the U.S. and I hear this.
It gives the sort of sentiment where it's just like, if you don't like what's happening in the United States, just move somewhere else. That's the type of sentiment that he's basically saying here.
Sentiment a lot, and I find it to be very. Well, the thing is, it's sad, but it's also kind of true. In some cases, is that people feel like voting doesn't work, and like voting does work, but it should work a lot more than it does. And I think that people are just so demoralized, and they're so fixated around trying to protest or force UCLA to do something that they lose track of what the power that people they really have is voting. We can hold people accountable. You can push.
Yeah, but Columbia had 90% of their student body in support of divesting, but they didn't. But you made the argument that doesn't matter. It's up to the colleges. So basically, essentially, what you were saying at that point is that voting doesn't matter, despite the fact that these people are using their money to go to this college. Like, they are giving these colleges tuition, and I agree that they should have a say in these sort of things. But you're saying that they shouldn't. So what's your A lot of his points are very contradictory in of themselves because they're not actually backed by what's actually going on.
For third parties, you can do that if there's enough people that believe in it, and I wish that energy and that.
I don't think it's that easy. I think the American electoral system makes that virtually impossible for the most part.
What is the alternative?
I think the alternative is making through public pressure, by way of causing some level of material harm in the form of strikes and labor militancy, as we have done historically in the past, is to organize on the boundaries of community, organize on the boundaries of labor, and make demands from at least one side of the political duopoly that they cannot ignore. And that is at the heart of protest movements like this. That's why I am fully in support of protest movements like this, because the reality of the matter is active lobbying efforts from corporations and the very powerful, very wealthy individuals in society have rendered American democracy useless. There are so many instances where there's like tremendous injustices that are occurring all around us that virtually every American would probably agree on, that seemingly get no solutions from our elected representatives. The system is designed as it stands currently. Yeah, but that's why I'm saying, like, it's not just about, it can't be just about democracy, because that's the expectation, or rather, shouldn't say it can't be just about democracy. This is about more democracy, right? To make your elected representatives represent your interests rather than the interests of the wealthy few. And in order to get there, you do actually have to take it to the streets sometimes. You do actually have to show them that, like, no, you can't fucking do this. Like, this is ridiculous. And
I think it's also about controlling a message and sending a message out that people believe in. Like, you can look at somebody like Bernie Sanders, right? You were a big supporter of Bernie Sanders. I also like Bernie Sanders. Like, the amount of money that he was getting versus, you know, a lot of the people that he was going against was like nothing compared to them. But at the same time,
I mean, he got a lot of money from individual donors, especially.
I mean, compared to the bigger candidates, I mean, I don't know, like with those massive fucking super PACs.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's always going to be, billionaires are going to have a much easier time, you know, dumping a $100 million of super PAC than like 100 million Americans giving $1. So yeah,
of course.
Yeah, grassroots is always much harder.
I think the strength of the message is something that also is important. And I think if there's a strong enough message, people will believe in it and people will push it. I mean, you know, we're the same age, right? So like, you remember Obama, right? I mean, that was a very strong message and people believed in that and they acted on it. And I think that it'll happen again too, whenever people.
But Obama was ultimately. Obama ran on ending, closing Guantanamo Bay, and like ran against the Iraq War, and then was responsible for the troop surge and like the continuation of the Iraq War, right? So like, I
understand.
So my point is, like, what do you do when your elected representatives that you voted for have told you a lie? Right?
Well, like, this is the thing, right? Because like, people use, for example, like you use the Revolutionary War or like the Boston Tea Party or something like that as an example of like justified violent, like basically protest. And I agree with you. And so I think the question is that I think violent and like, you know, material destruction protest, like basically illegal protest, is completely justifiable if you're not able to like vent your frustrations democratically. And so I think the question is really depending on, do people have the opportunity to vent those frustrations democratically? Because like what you're saying is like,
well, do you think they have this in this particular matter in America? Because you said
there's two circumstances, right? You're talking about the schools. I think that they don't have it, and I think that they don't have the right to have it because it's not democratic fundamentally. Not everything needs to be democratic. And if you own something, it's like if 5 people outside your house democratically vote that, you know, your house should be, you know, everybody's house, that doesn't necessarily mean that you lose your house.
Well, I mean, if they paid for it, if they paid for my house, then I think it's a whole different conversation. If they didn't pay for my house,
conversation, but it doesn't mean that it's a democracy.
No, I'm saying that if they paid for my house, that they would have a righteous say. They would have an understandable say in like, in a circumstance where like they're living in the house and they paid for the house and they're basically renting, then yeah, no, they do have a right, in my opinion, both morally and in some instances legally, in what happens in the house. That's why if your landlord refuses to fix your fucking mold, for example, you do have a right. Many people don't know this, but you literally do have a right to deny them payment even. So, I mean, it's state by state.
No, it definitely has to go both ways. But what I'm saying is that you can't do everything by tyranny of the majority. And I think that also whenever you're talking about private property, people should have the right to decide what is and what isn't.
It's not private property. It's already been talked about. It's just so dumb. Also, like, a great point, like, yeah, these people are essentially renting, basically. So, like, yeah, they should have some say. But, just keep going back to that point, even though it's already been, you know, talked about almost fucking hell at this point. Jesus Christ.
Private property, and I don't think that people who own private property should, you know, be at the mercy of the majority in a lot of cases.
No, that's why. That's why this is public property. Like university campuses, especially state universities, are public property. That's actually quite literally
more
the reason
times do we
why,
have to
for
go
example,
back to this point?
you know those
We
Westboro
already
Baptist
talked
church
about
freaks that go to like all
public
college
property.
campuses and like talk
Jesus.
about how like yell at students and call them the F slur and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Like those guys oftentimes cannot be kicked out of college campuses for this specific reason, because technically it is public property that their tax dollars are paying for, which makes the situation all the more complicated and all the more egregious in terms of a violation of First Amendment rights.
Yeah, I think that it's really about the encampment in that case, right? Because the people that were there were really getting kicked out. They weren't really getting kicked out for protesting. They were getting kicked out for having an encampment there.
Well, so they were getting kicked out for protesting. They were getting kicked out for protesting. They just used trespassing, even though originally they didn't have an issue with it. Here's what makes it even worse. Originally, they didn't have an issue with it, right?
Yeah.
And then the counter protesters showed up. First day, second day, third day, the counter protesters showed up in incredibly violent ways, right? And you saw that, you recognized it as well.
Yeah.
Then the
obvious.
school cynically, the school cynically turned around and said, well, this is now a safety issue. So what do you think, what kind of lesson do you think that teaches everyone around the country? That if you want these students to shut the fuck up, if you're, if you're like a 45-year-old Zionist dude who just wants to unconditionally dick ride Israel into oblivion, go and beat the shit out of some students, and inevitably the school will turn around and use your violent actions against them to basically say, now the state has to come in and pack up these.
It's victim blaming. It's taking the victims from this violent act and being like, you're the reason why. And that's, even then, that's not even what the vice chancellor of UCLA did. He basically said like, oh, this is a safety concern, so we're gonna have the police come in and essentially do a sweep. But like, then it's like, but it's just like, and the protesters brought up like, we were the ones who started this. It was them. We were peaceful up until they came after us, and even then, they were still being very peaceful compared to the counter protesters. Like, why are you going after us, the people who were attacked, and not the people, and not the attackers, the people who came here with purpose, with intent to attack us, and they're not getting harmed at all? It's just insane. It would be like if you were just walking on the street. Just walking on the street, someone came up, punched you in the face, and someone else called the police and was just like, hey, this dude just got punched in the face. Make sure that guy who got punched in the face never goes on the sidewalk again. Remove him from the sidewalk by force. That's what they did. That's essentially what they did.
Students themselves. So they first got beaten by the Zionist counter-protesters, many of which have been identified and are not from the school at all. Then on top of that, the school used that instance to directly pack you up. Like because there's a reason. You can't just declare something unlawful. Like, that's not how this works, right? Because like vice chancellors are voted on democratically oftentimes by the student body, and the administration at least like has to maintain a semblance of democracy, especially because it's a woke elite learning institution, right?
Well, I mean, like, just to make one thing clear, like, if these people weren't at, there was no encampment there and they were just sitting there protesting, I think that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
So you wouldn't have an issue if they were just sitting there protesting, but because they built a camp to protest.
That's essentially what they were doing. The only difference is that they like literally said like, hey, this is our encampment. Like, but even then, that's still like, because if you believe it's private property, even though it's not, sitting there would still break that private, like, if they were still sitting there, they would still be sitting on private property. So what's the difference between, like, it's so minuscule it means nothing. The difference between just sitting there in the encampment.
Continuously, that it demands violent retaliation from the force, like it justifies violent retaliation from the state.
I think so, yeah. I do. Because like they have no right to do that. They have no right to just start building and putting up tents there. That's insane.
What's literally the difference between them just sitting there and them building tents? What's the difference? What is it? Because he's not giving them a reason. He's just like, it's bad. That's it. That's been his whole reasoning for this entire thing, basically. It's just, it's bad, and I don't think that it should be allowed, despite the fact that, and he's trying to like use the law to support him, but the law's not on his side because he's not even getting a lot of his facts right.
Continued protest.
And also, also keep in mind that whenever I'm talking about, you're saying engaging in violent actions, like the police told them to leave. The university said that they wanted them to leave. So, like,
and them not leaving is not a violent act. That's not violence at all.
Violence was the only thing that was left. And so it's like, does somebody have the right, again, and this is what I was saying initially, does somebody have the right to defend their property? And I think the answer is to that is
it's not their property. It's property that the students are paying for, and it's the state property too, so it's like taxpayers. But
it's the property that all the students are paying.
That doesn't mean it's private property now, you dipshit. It's still public property. Like, Jesus Christ, how many more times do we literally have to get to the whole private? I'm literally just on a skip forward at this point. He keeps bringing up private property. It keeps getting shut down. He keeps bringing it up. It's a stupid fucking point. Move on. That's
why they had
get to where they talk about the civil rights. Like, Hasan compares it to the civil rights movement. Asmon disagrees, and they talk about that. That's where I was kind of joining when it came to the stream. God, this keeps going on, and keeps bringing up the same points, and it's so stupid and meaningless. Yeah. Let's just get forward.
Show like overwhelming majority support from both independents and Democrats, and even a majority of support from the Republican Party in terms of a ceasefire, for example, which is a position that the Biden administration has like not budged on and seemingly claims that they care about and want to bring about, but never really done so. So
I think they're just paying it lip service.
Absolutely. So
It seems like.
so there's stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So my question, I guess, is what is to be done in that situation? Because like I think that democratically speaking, part of the reason why we voted for Joe Biden, myself and many others in my demographic voted for Joe Biden, because we saw the horrifying ways in which like the BLM protests were dealt with by the police force, and that was a promise. It was a campaign promise that the Biden administration had made. And now these young Americans are also seeing that very same police resistance in another circumstance where there's like peaceful demonstrations happening. Sometimes it hasn't gotten to like Black Lives Matter point yet. Obviously, it's not as widely attended. And it hasn't like turned into riots, I guess, in this circumstance. But that is a direct contradiction of like what you voted for, what we all voted for.
And I don't think that you really voted for Joe Biden for that reason, because you voted for him because he was the option that the Democratic Party gave you. Because like I think that you were Bernie Sanders, like you were about that. And then he got fucked.
No, for sure. But my point is that was a part of it. The part of it that was that he's not Donald Trump, and Donald Trump was the one that was like actively suppressing and saying law and order over and over again when faced with like the Black Lives Matter protest. So that was the assessment from many who voted for Joe Biden, thinking that like, well, he would be able to bring about some positive change and maybe tackle some of the issues within policing and discrimination. Now, obviously that didn't happen, but beyond that, there are many other campaign promises that were violated, including but not limited to dealing with protesters, like talking about journalists getting arrested and whatnot. That was another major point of consideration. There's a video of Biden talking about the George Floyd protest, saying, "We will not allow any president to quiet our voice. We won't let those who see this as an opportunity to sow chaos throw up a smokescreen to distract us from the very real and legitimate grievances at the heart of these protests." Now that he's president, however, he basically reinforced.
His tone has changed. He's saying these protests are anti-Semitic now, and literally approves of any method to disperse them. And it's crazy. It's why I said this before with my when I was talking about the protests themselves. I'm probably not gonna vote. I'm more than likely not gonna vote for Joe Biden this year. I'm not gonna support him at all, because like it's just at this point it's literally just voting for Trump light. Because everything that he promised he wasn't going to do, he's doing, especially in accounts like this. He's not keeping he's keeping very little of his campaign promises. And even the stuff that he does right is so minuscule compared to this. Like, it's just insane how he's been handling this whole situation again. Like, the only difference between him and Trump is that Biden hasn't said, like, Biden just, hasn't said that he will allow the National Guard to handle this. It's just insane. But even then, he's still very much supporting the violence that's been going on.
Of course, the law and order must happen narrative that Donald Trump was advocating for. So my question always is like, well, what is to be done? How do you and many other Americans get our lawfully elected representatives to actually follow through on the demands that they originally ran on the promises that they originally made?
I don't know, because I think it's a very complex question, because I'm sure some promises are made and then somebody gets into office and they realize, wait a minute, it's not that simple, it's not that easy. And I think there are probably instances,
Don't be that fucking dumb. You know what it is. They make promises, and because they never intend to keep those promises, they just know what their they would know what their voter base wants. But they say that, and once they get into office, they're just going to run with the things that work for them, even if it doesn't, support the population as a whole. Like, so...
saying this is one of them. I think it's actually in fact not. But I think that there are probably instances where campaign promises are made with partial information, and then whenever the person gets more information, they decide not to do it.
Well, Joe Biden's been president.
By the way, this is someone, and this is what Joe Biden has been in politics for decades at this point. He should know whether or not he could fulfill promises or not. So that being like, using that to try to kind of like support Biden in a way is bullshit. He has been in politics for many, many years. The crime bill, he has participated with stuff like the crime bill back in the 90s. He knows how this shit works. So saying, like little baby, like saying, oh, Biden's just a little baby, he didn't know. is bullshit.
Joe Biden was in
He's been
elected
in office.
office
He's been
and
around
was
for
the
like
vice
50
president.
years, right? Yeah. I mean, no, I'm not saying this is an example, but I think that there are instances of that. But I don't really know what is the option for that. What do you do? Because like, and like this is the question, like, what do you think? Because I don't know.
Well,
Because
I
like, what do
mean,
you like, riot? Do you like go and like have a recall? I think
That's such a dumb, like, well, I don't know. Like, just using, just kind of weaponizing incompetence to support this guy, just being like, well, you can't really criticize him on this part because I don't know. Like, what defense is this?
at a certain point, it's like I think a lot of people get tricked into voting for this person, and I don't know how to solve that because the Democratic and the Republican parties are so big. It's like how do you fight against that? But I think that like you just kind of have to, and I don't know
By
like
protesting or like by doing what these students have been doing. By doing what many people, like, but with the BLM protest, what they did. Just by making a statement in this sort of way where it can't be ignored, it can't be denied. That's how you do it. Like, it's so, I mean, it's not like he's the only person who does this. Many of us do this, where we have certain views on things that conflict others. But when it comes to this, it's just so hard because, like, so he acknowledges that the Democratic and Republican Party is so big that it's hard to really vote for someone who would hold these values true when they get into office, shit like that. But like, he also thinks that people shouldn't do what these student protesters did and just like vote if they really want change to be done. But you acknowledge that the Democratic and Republican parties are too big for that to be too effective. So what's your solution? Like, none of his points really mesh well with one another. They're very contradictory in a way.
what alternative you could do that would have any sort of like real meaningful impact.
right. Well, this is one vector of pressure, like protests, campus-wide protests in general on the streets. It's a very good and historically very successful
on the
way
streets. He
to
doesn't like
get
that.
the government to meet your demands, even if it's halfway. So that's why I'm in support of the Palestinian pro-Palestinian encampments that are happening all around campuses all around the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like my perspective is that I support the idea. I support the freedom of speech. I think that at a certain point, whenever you are breaking the law does have to be upheld to a certain extent. But I also think that people's ability to protest should also.
So you need to, so you can freely express your rebellion against the system and believe it needs to be changed, but you need to do it within the system. I already said this before. That's not an effective way to do it. Like, it is good to keep things peaceful, to try to do that. It is, because it makes your side look a lot better, just from an optics issue, of being like, look at these peaceful protesters, keeping the peace, working within the system to try to change it. But when you have something like police officers coming in and just arresting all these people who weren't doing anything wrong, at some point you just have to look at that and be like, well, that's not going to work then. If even the most peaceful thing we can do is not going to work, what are you going to do after that? Obviously, you're probably going to be like, well, if the system is rigged against us in the first place, then who cares? Even if we deal with it in the most peaceful way possible, we're still going to get fucked. So, who cares about the system? Whatever. Like, that's a pretty logical way of looking at it. But then again, sure, whatever.
Be upheld. I think that, for example, like camping out somewhere for 6 days and not leaving even after they tell you to leave and the police tell you to leave, I think that's too much. But I also don't.
But that's not against the law though, because it's public property. So it doesn't even go with what you're trying to say.
They told them to leave because they said that it was endangering the students themselves, like in the encampment, saying that and in that circumstance, if they truly cared about that, they could have used the police to protect the encampment rather than.
Well, that's clearly not the real reason. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the point. That's what I mean. If that's not the reason, and that's just simply the seasoning that they're adding on to the conversation, then there's one real reason why they're doing it, and that is because they just want the students to shut the fuck up and go away.
It wasn't. They tried to use the whole safety thing to validate their reasoning to do this, because there was no legal reason they could do to just send the police in there to clear the encampment. They had no they had no valid reason to do that. So they had to look for one. So they used these counter protesters being violent towards them. It's a bullshit reason, obviously, but that's why they did it. Because, and if those counter protesters never did it, they still would not have a reason to do it. They might have done it regardless, but it would look terrible on them, and it would be a lot of trouble for them because they would have done it without reason. But even then, like, even with this case, it still looks incredibly bad on them because everyone looks at this and it's just like, yeah, this is bullshit. Like, someone attacked them, so they're facing the punishment for that attack. Like, it's bullshit.
Get the fuck out of there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's a bad thing. It definitely is a bad thing, but at the same time, I also think it's a bad thing for a bunch of people to just go camp out at the university for, multiple days.
God, continuing to do this, even though it's, God, we're moving on. You can't stop making the same points, even though they're completely bullshit.
Institutions, whether it be universities or whether it be
people, if they want to protest, the best way to protest is to fucking vote. Like, that's what needs to happen. But like, I don't think that you can rely on just getting a bunch of people together.
And then, you already said that. You already acknowledged the problem with that when you have two parties that are so big. Again, just such dumb fucking logic with them.
Hopefully the government is going to do what you want, because also, like, just because there's a lot of people protesting doesn't always mean that means that that's what the majority of the people want. Because the majority of the people
did not want, any kind of desegregation in general.
It depends probably on where, but I think that in some cases you're probably right. Where they had to like march the,
Yeah, desegregation wasn't popular. Does that make the civil rights movement wrong? Does that make it would you be against the civil rights movement then? Because that doesn't follow your logic whatsoever.
The South,
yeah, you're right about that.
So that was that was the minority in that circumstance, and allies of the black community demonstrating unlawfully. Like they were breaking the law. They were specifically going to segregated institutions, whether it be universities or whether it be restaurants, private establishments, and demonstrating in the show of force to say that these are unlawful, these are unjust laws that are in place, and these are unjust practices that are in place that are that the government turns a blind eye to, and that needs to change. And in that instance, just like these students, like there were plenty of different mechanisms of the state that, no, it wasn't just the government. I'm saying like private institutions were the ones who were enforcing segregation on their own volition. The reason,
and this will become a whole thing too. I think Hasan does bring it up. This is very a white moderate way of thinking that Martin Luther King speaks on, where there will be these people who will appear to be on your side. And obviously, he called it the white moderate because this was a race-related issue, and it would be white people who would play a centrist role of being like, hey, we're on your side. We believe in things you do. It's just not the right time, or you're just not doing it in the right way. Just trying to find these little criticisms and make them into big things. It's the same thing that he's been doing with these pro-Palestine encampments and the protests, being like, you're not doing it the right way. You're not doing it the way like that's most considerable to the people that you are protesting against. And it's like, it's what I said before. You can't work against a system by working in the system, because and like it's great if you can do that, but as we saw with UCLA, you still get fucked over when you do, even when you're doing it in a peaceful manner. But that's very much what he was speaking on, of being like, there's these people who, will say we'll be on your side, but will also try to go out of their way to downplay or try to lessen your impact and trying to do it in they're essentially trying to downplay the movement with a smile on their face and making it seem like they're your friend. And that's what Asmon has been doing in this regard.
Why we have the reason why we have specific rights that actually interfere in the way that private businesses conduct their affairs on the boundaries of exclusion for certain races and even gender discrimination is specifically because...
this was what I was talking about when I was talking about Ben Shapiro hating on the Civil Rights Act. This is actually something that he is against. He doesn't think that the government should interfere with this. He basically wants it to be legal again for businesses to segregate, at least from how he talks about it, in a way. Oh god, it's just it's really gross. I know he reacted to a video about it, so I would watch that. I think it's on one of the fan channels, though. I don't think he posted it himself.
And this was the segregationist argument at the time, which was just let the businesses do whatever they want. I'm sure that people will take their dollars elsewhere, but it didn't work that way. Plenty of people actually genuinely loved the idea that there were white-only institutions. White people had more capital than black people, especially in the South, and therefore all of these businesses, if it wasn't for the federal government, inevitably due to a tremendous amount of protest and a tremendous amount of resistance and a lot of state violence that tried to squash this democratic resistance. If it wasn't for all of that, then we would still not have any laws that interfere in the affairs of private businesses and refuse them to allow them to discriminate.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, definitely. I think if you're talking about the protests that are happening now, I do think that is different than the civil rights movement. It's certainly different. And whenever you're talking about the civil rights movement also, like, I don't know if we can really apply something that happened 60 years ago to something that's happening right now or 50 years ago. It's very hard.
That's so dumb, being like, oh, well, it happened a long time ago. It didn't not happen that long ago. There are people who were a part of the civil rights movement who are still alive today. Like, if you have someone who's still alive from a certain time period, that's not a long time ago. That's not, like, it's so dumb. And it's just like, we can always use history to learn. Doesn't matter how long ago it was. We should still be able to look back at history, and just because it happened a long time ago doesn't mean we can't learn from it and compare it to modern times. Because, yeah, while things change, it's like the saying goes, the more things change, the more they remain the same.
Hard for me to say. I think in some cases you're probably right. In some cases, maybe not so much.
What do you mean by it's different?
It's different because the entire culture is different. The way that people are making decisions is different. The way that people can vote is different. There are all of these ways that are different.
I mean,
so
yeah, black people were not, they couldn't really vote. I mean, I guess it's not that different now because there's many different ways of legally restricting black people from voting.
Also, he says it in the broadest term, like, oh, the culture is different. Oh, the way that people think is different. Everyone thinks different. That's the thing. Like, everyone has their own method of thinking, and contributing that to like time, like the passage of time, doesn't work. I don't know. It's a dumb framing of it. It's him trying to disconnect the conversation, because obviously what Hasan is saying is right of comparing the civil rights movement to this, because it is valid to use that type of like, and even not, like, you could always use this for any type of protest. Like, I mean, like the Vietnam War protests that were happening. You could, like with what happened with Colombia with the students, storming into Hamilton Hall. That happened like 56 years ago. Like on the same day that they did it, just a few days ago, like a week ago. 56 years ago, on the same day, Vietnam War protesters did the same thing, and they were dealt with a very similar manner. But do you think? But even though that is a 1-for-1 comparison, just with different subjects, do you honestly think that we can't compare? Like, we can't, like, we can't base our we can't draw conclusions from one to the other just because it happened a long time ago. It's like if someone was talking about like the Nazis today, and you were talking about talking about a very radical, hateful movement today, and try to compare it to the Nazis of the 1940s. And someone said, you can't compare it to the Nazis. That was a long time ago. Yeah, but Nazi ideology remains the same. The ideology does not fade away with time for some people. Like, it's not like when World War II stopped, Nazis just stopped existing. It's an ideology. It's a mindset that will continue on. And we see that very much today.
But that's more complex. But ultimately, the methods were unlawful. The point I was trying to arrive at here is that the methods were unlawful. They were seen as unlawful. They were seen as they were met with a lot of police resistance. And ultimately, that police resistance led to a shit ton of violence. And people were talking about the chaos in the exact same terms and in the exact same boundaries as they do right now with respect to the pro-Palestinian encampments. But ultimately, these students are following on the footsteps of those who fought bravely for civil rights and fought bravely against the Vietnam War. In some instances, occupying the exact same spaces.
Oh, I mean, like, and I understand that. I have no problem with them doing that, but I do have a problem doing it whenever it's destroying property and taking away other people's education.
But they said that about the civil rights movement as well, is what I mean. Like, ultimately, I think I'm glad that they had the ends justify the means attitude during the civil rights movement. And I'm glad that they had an ends justify the means attitude during the Vietnam War protests or during the boycott, divestment, and sanctions
I think
protests
those
against.
conflicts are way more complex than that.
Well,
I don't
BDS is identical. It's the same exact. It's literally like almost definitionally identical. It's a boycott, divestment, and sanctions on apartheid South Africa in 1985. This was also another student-led movement as well, and the methods were identical too. The only difference is South Africa did not have the benefit of having another South Africa that they could learn the mistakes from and make sure that they don't repeat it. Israel had South Africa to look to, so they could like set up a lobbying effort and ensure that the state bends to their will as to the best of their ability. Media apparatus as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Israel is much more influential than that. I mean, I can see where you're coming from. I think that that type of mindset is very scary to me because while you're right that it does create a lot of positive outcomes, it also creates a lot of negative outcomes as well.
Do you have examples of the negative outcomes? Like as far as a democratically organized revolutionary movement?
What do you mean by that?
Like,
the negative well, I'm just saying.
Is there an example that you can give me throughout history where people organized on certain boundaries that were like democratically organized on certain boundaries and they like enforced the tyranny of majority and like something awful happened as a consequence of that?
I'm sure I could think of some. I mean, absolutely. And I think it happens all the time on a very basic level.
But can you actually give examples of what they were? Just because you say, I can think of some. It's like that Aiden Ross XQC debate. Just because Aiden Ross said that he could find examples of teenagers being or children being injected with hormones doesn't mean it's happening, because he didn't have any examples, just like he doesn't really have any examples, but because he says I can probably think of some, like, no, you need like proof. Like if you have a strong opinion about this and you believe that you are right, you should have proof to back it up.
For example, like during the BLM riots, people were obviously burning down buildings and doing things like that. That's something I don't really support, and I don't think that
was. Here's the thing with the BLM protests, 5% of them were violent. 5% of them were riots. A small minority of them, for the most part, for a vast majority, they were peaceful. That 5%, those were violent. But would you say that 5% is all the BLM movement was? Like, no, that would be idiotic for you to say that. And for the most part, some of those were done in favor of the movement. Some of them were done also by bad actors, people who took it upon themselves to use the situation as a whole to do violent acts. That doesn't mean that they were necessarily, even if they were necessarily in support of it, they weren't doing it as a part. Like, it's not like it's not like the organizers told them to do that. They did that of their own accord. There's always going to be bad faith actors. And with this case, we see it with people who are anti-Semitic, who try to use these sort of pro-Palestine protests to spread their anti-Semitic rhetoric. But for the most part, usually they are taken care of by the pro-Palestinian protesters. Like, they'll get kicked out of the group, they'll get kicked out of the encampment. They are dealt with in the community. There were people who were doing these bad faith acts during the BLM protests, and there were BLM protesters who were trying to stop them. People who were trying to steal from stores. There were BLM protesters who were trying to stop those people.
Beneficial, and I'm never going to support that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not helping anybody. It's not doing anything for anyone. It's purely destructive, and I don't think that people have the right to do that. I think that, yeah, you should have the right to protest. But if you use the justification for the ends justify the means, then I think that anybody can use that justification, and that justification can be used for malicious.
But it depends on whether that's true or not. Like, yeah, anyone could say that. Anyone could say that, but is it true? Obviously, there's going to be bad faith actors, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't. Just because some people are going to use a system in a bad way doesn't mean that we should allow other people to. We shouldn't allow other people to use that system in a right way. So, like, the ends justify the means. It can definitely be used in a terrible way. Like, if someone's a religious extremist and they use their religion to commit violent acts, that's obviously a bad thing. But if someone is, you know, being disruptive during a protest to stand up for a righteous cause such as this one, or such as police brutality with the BLM protest, that's obviously a just cause. This is just, and that's always going to play into, you know, personal opinion. That's the thing. It's a loose, it's a tricky subject, but like that doesn't mean that it can't be true.
Reasons. And there's the only way to have a world that's fair is to have some sort of generally accepted rules. And that's what we have for laws. And I see where you're coming from with the civil rights movement, but you have to see the perspective that I have too, that if you allow people to just, justify themselves by thinking, well, our cause is righteous, so it's okay for us to do it, it would immediately cause huge amounts of chaos.
Yeah, because no, I understand. This is exactly the same arguments launched against the civil rights movement as well. MLK spoke on this with great frequency, where in the eyes of those who are being wronged, or in their experiences, not even in their own perspective, their regular existence is chaotic, right? And this is from letter from Birmingham jail, where he talks specifically about the white moderate, where he talks about the white moderate who places a timeline on another man's emancipation and another man's justice that says your methods and your means of protest are actually not right, or now is not the time. Where he very specifically talks about people who were naysayers to the civil rights movement who said, like, oh no, now is not the time, or things are actually much better than they would be if black people were still enslaved, and there's too much property damage happening. The point is, from their perspective at that time, for black people, especially living in the segregated South, or even redlined in the North, America was consistently chaotic. And it still is for many people of color, especially living in...
Mind, like you're talking about Martin Luther King, he also explicitly was against blocking transportation. And so there were lines even that he had.
Wait, Martin Luther King...
I just want to go back to that.
And so there were lines even that he had.
Just like that, just that snap realization of just being like, what did you just say?
Wait, Martin Luther King also participated in the Montgomery bus boycott.
Let me see if I can.
Right.
I don't know if I can link this.
He led the Montgomery bus boycott for 382 days, which officially ended on December 20th, 1956. That's like...
I sent you a link in the chat.
In the Discord chat?
Yeah.
What is this? Farmer King and Lewis, along with millions of Americans, struggle to figure out what would amount to legitimate and appropriate forms of nonviolent protest. Tactics dramatic enough to make their impact, but not so disruptive as to alienate supporters. Okay. Everyone could agree on the nobility, even the genius of the original sit-ins, conducted with such dignity that their moral power was overwhelming. What is this? At an early press conference, an organizer with King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference declared, we will tie up public transportation by laying our bodies prostrate on the runways of airports across railroad tracks. This degree of disorder was too much even for King, who walked back the staffer's comments. Over the summer, as the Kennedy administration reversed course to support the march, Rustin realized that attracting hundreds of thousands of marchers he desired meant abandoning the controversial tactics that would alienate the mainstream. In the end, as comedian activist Dick Gregory said, the march went off like a Sunday church picnic. Ultimately, these protests at the time were still declared disruptive, though. You understand that, right? Like every single instance, including the Montgomery bus boycott, was declared to be disruptive and at the time, and was violently suppressed.
Yeah, they literally downplayed their means of protest, and even then, they were still seen as disruptive. So even when these people tried to work within the system, because they thought it would be too controversial, the media and the people in power still spun it in a way to make it look as if though it was disruptive. So at that point, it's just kind of like, who cares?
By the state. Like none of these protests, not a single one of these protests actually was met with, hugs and kisses, and the state being like, you know what, you guys are making a sound argument. And at the time, the coverage...
I think that whenever you justify...
Like, all those marches during the civil rights movement, you could literally make the argument of, like, that was wrong because they were in the middle of the street, and it disrupt a lot of things.
Like, you can't just do anything that you want whenever you've decided that you have the moral authority to do that. Like, it's very easy to go and look at the civil rights movement and say, well, they did this to an extent, so it's okay for us to do it. But if you apply this to real life, I don't think that it really works. Like,
did the civil rights movement not happen? That was real life. You dipshit. Like, what? Like, say, if you apply this to real life, yeah, that happened in real life. Do you know what real life is? You're seeing it. You're seeing it when cops brutalize these students. You see it when they saw it back in the day when these movements by Martin Luther King, by the civil rights movement, even in their most peaceful forms, were still labeled disruptive. That's real life. Do you know what real life is? Are you that? If the roaches infected your brain that much that you can't tell what real life is, you're seeing it. This isn't a like the civil rights movement wasn't a movie. It wasn't a piece of fiction. It happened, and the same thing's happening right now with these pro-Palestinian protests. They're in real life. They're not just stuff that you're seeing on your screen. There's stuff that's actually happening in real life. Like what? Like just the phrasing of that is completely insane. Like I don't like it just honestly him just saying that makes me feel like he doesn't really see a lot of these people as people, which is which is monstrous. It honestly comes across that he doesn't see the people who protested during the civil rights movement as people. If you're saying, well, we can't apply what happened with the civil rights movement to real life, and maybe that's putting words in his mouth, but still, like, why are you phrasing it this way as if the civil rights movement happened in a vacuum or just happened in this fictional world that we don't live in?
Just because you're morally aggrieved about something, it doesn't give you the right to destroy other people's property, to stay on their property, or to do things that hurt other people.
Well, the property is not their property. We established that. Like this is, they participated in sit-ins in colleges in the civil rights movement as well. They were doing exactly the same stuff that these students are doing, if not much more militant. There's also another side of the civil rights movement that often doesn't get discussed in mainstream media or in our schools in general that also played a significant role, according to MLK as well, which was the more militant action where Black people would demonstrate with weapons or directly get into active confrontation with the police and like shootouts and whatnot. Now, that did play a role in increasing pressure points for the state to look at the more reasonable parties, the peaceful demonstrations, and concede to the demands being made by all of the parties. So all of this played an active role. You can't have one without the other is what I mean. But even in this circumstance, we're looking at only one aspect, the civil disobedience of the civil rights movement.
Right. You're right whenever you say you can't have one without the other, but I don't think that being an inevitability justifies the other. So
but they haven't even reached that point, is what I'm saying. We're currently in the beginning stages. We're currently in the stage where we're getting upset and using ruthless police tactics to stop peaceful demonstrations from occurring. Like these demonstrations have not even met like the civil disobedience metrics of the civil rights movement.
I brought up the Samuel Jackson, what he did. We haven't even entered there. Like there's no pro-Palestinian protesters who are at gunpoint forcing, like holding board members hostage. We haven't even entered that point. If we did, trust me, you would hear about it because the media would be pointing at that as like, look at this one example of these like violent pro-Palestinian protesters, because they can't have any. Like they would definitely be using that as like a huge talking point. Like we haven't even reached that level yet, and we're probably nowhere close to it. Like these people, like these protesters have been very civil. And the thing that would probably stop making them civil now would probably be what happened with UCLA. Where, like, again, with Columbia, they did break into a hall. Do I necessarily believe that is a just cause to send an entire police force to brutally arrest them? No. And it, like, but even then, yes, they are going on private property. So technically it is against the law. If we're working with Asmongold's understanding, like, if that's how they should operate. But with what happened with UCLA, there was no breaking of the law that the students did, and yet this still happened to them.
Yeah, I think that really, I mean, I'll go back to what I said initially. I don't think that a group of students should be able to go into the university and just start camping out there.
Ultimately, the point is like there's nothing that they can do, right? Like, because I asked like, what can they do then? And you said that they should just go to a different university. Well, what happens when that university also has endowments?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, the world is not obligated to appeal to you. The world, like, if other people don't want to do what you want, then it's not like everybody has to find a way that it's okay for you to do that.
Essentially,
like,
what he's saying is just lick the fucking boot and don't do anything. That's essentially what he's saying. But he's just trying, again, just doing it in a nice way of being like, no, I believe people should have the right to protest, but they should only do it in a way that doesn't actually affect change. Like, what are we doing?
If other people don't want to agree with you, it's not your right to force them to agree with you. That's crazy.
Yeah, this isn't about other...
But they're not forcing anyone. That's the thing. Again, we're just talking circles at this point again. of just, he has no real talking points, so he just has to repeat the stuff that he's already, like, he already has to, like, repeat all the conclusions that he has drawn himself of, like, oh no, these people are using force. Well, they're not actually forcing, they're just on public property in an encampment and allowing the campus to go about on its day-to-day operations. They're not forcing anyone to do anything. They're just staking out there, and they just want the college to hear them out. Oh, well, they're doing it on private property. No, it's on public property. Well, they're forcing them. They're not forcing them. The college could still operate on its day-to-day operations if it wanted to. It just chooses not to, so that it could, like, you know, so that, like, the encampment, the students who are in the encampment can't continue their schoolwork. That's why they're doing it. Like, it's just repeating the same things over and over and over again because he has no real arguments. And even when he's given proof, it's still not enough for him, apparently, because he's already drawn his conclusion of this being bad. And here's the thing, it would be fine if he just didn't talk about it. He is the one who's talking, like, nobody would care if he didn't talk about this. That's the thing. He didn't talk about this for the longest time. Nobody cared. It's not like people were outraged. Like, it's not like people were constantly clamoring for him to say something about this. Like, no, he took it upon himself to talk about this. He is the one who made the video that was reacting to Hasan on Piers Morgan, and he said, I don't care about Israel or Palestine. And then after that, he decided to talk about the student protest. He's the one who did this. He could have chosen not to. He makes, like, he uploads several times a day. Let's just see how many times he has uploaded today. He's uploaded 1, 2, in like the last 24 hours. 1, 2, 3, 4 videos. I'm sure he could have found someone else to talk about. He's the one who decided to talk about it. Like, so if he, like, so there's no reason for him to be like, oh, all these people are coming after me. Like, all these people, like, making all these, like, oh, I'm canceled videos. Like, just don't talk about it. Like, you obviously don't know what you're talking about. You already drawn your own conclusion, probably because of the propaganda that your Reddit feeds you. Like, he keeps making these, like, he posted on Twitter, like, the thing that started this whole conversation with him and Assad was him posting on Twitter, was this tweet. Looks like Twitter is mad about me not supporting protesters' First Amendment rights to build a Rust base on campus and block students from going to class. Keep crying about it, guys. If you're loud enough, you might end up on tomorrow's video. He didn't make the video because hopefully he understands that he's wrong, but he still has the video where he openly cheers for these students being attacked, being, like, brutally arrested by the police. But, like, you're doing this to yourself. You didn't have to talk about it. You chose to. And you already faced a fair amount of criticism for that initial video, in which he said, I don't care about Israel, I don't care about Palestine. I just don't like it when people block the roads. He could have just seen that and just be like, well, maybe I just won't talk about this. Maybe I just shouldn't talk about this. Obviously, it's a, touchy subject. Maybe I just won't. But his community more than likely fed into it, and he realized that, like, or he just like, oh, well, this is a good way to get, I don't know. Like, you feel like he would at least try to find, like, good talking points if he truly, like, wanted to get more into this conversation. But he just keeps bringing the same stuff over and over again. And it's just getting tiresome. And I'm probably just going to leave the video here. Because I feel like this is probably a good end. I can't really stomach any more of this. I just want to get to gaming at this point and just end the night on that. But yeah, we'll just end it here. Just play shit show.